Carthage once ruled the western Mediterranean, not with legions, but with ships, silver, and strategic alliances. At its height, this North African city commanded trade routes stretching from modern-day Tunisia to Spain, Sicily, and beyond. And yet, today, it is mostly remembered for its defeat. Why did a civilization so advanced, so wealthy, and so feared by Rome vanish so completely from the historical stage? This is the story of the Carthaginian Empire. Long before Carthage rose to prominence along the North African coast, its roots were planted firmly in the eastern Mediterranean. To understand Carthage, we must begin with the Phoenicians, a seafaring people from the Levant, known not for vast armies or monumental architecture, but for trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. Among the greatest of their city-states was Tyre, located in what is now modern-day Lebanon. It was from this ancient city that Carthage was born. By the late 2nd millennium BCE, Tyre had emerged as a leading city among the Phoenicians. These coastal people were renowned for their shipbuilding, navigation, and craftsmanship. They did not form a unified kingdom, but instead lived in independent city-states such as Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. Each governed itself, but all shared a common language, religious traditions, and commercial outlook. Their reputation spread far and wide. Greek writers often praise the Phoenicians for their skills at sea and their ability to connect distant markets. Tyre, in particular, became a powerhouse. Its wealth came largely from trade and a rare purple dye known as Tyrian purple, made from crushed murex shells. This dye was so valuable that it became a symbol of royalty across the ancient world. But Tyre's real strength was its location and maritime expertise. Situated on an island near the coast, it was naturally defensible and ideally placed to serve as a hub between east and west. As early as the 12th century BCE, Tyrian merchants were sailing across the Mediterranean, establishing outposts and trading stations along the coasts of Cyprus, Crete, and North Africa. These were not military colonies, but commercial ones, intended to resupply ships, facilitate trade, and build local partnerships. It was in this context, around the 9th century BCE, that one such outpost became something more: Carthage. Ancient sources, especially Roman writers like Virgil and historians like Justin, tell us that Carthage was founded by settlers from Tyre around the year 814 BCE. While the exact date is debated by modern scholars, archaeological evidence does support the presence of Phoenician settlement in the area during the late 9th or early 8th century BCE. The story often told is that of Queen Dido, a noblewoman who fled political upheaval in Tyre and led a group of followers across the sea to found a new city. According to the Roman poet Virgil, she negotiated with local Berber tribes to purchase a small parcel of land, no more than what could be enclosed with a single ox hide. Cunningly, she cut the hide into thin strips and used them to encircle a much larger area, which became the heart of Carthage. Although this story is legendary and shaped by later Roman interpretations, it reflects a key truth. The founding of Carthage was both a result of Phoenician maritime expansion and local negotiation. Carthage did not arise in a vacuum. It was the product of careful planning, trading networks, and cooperation, or at times conflict, with North African peoples already living in the region. From the beginning, Carthage bore the cultural imprint of Tyre. The people spoke a Semitic language closely related to Hebrew and Aramaic. They worshipped a pantheon of gods common to Phoenician religion, including Baal-Hamon, the chief deity, and the goddess Tanit, who would become especially important in the Western colonies. They practiced ritual sacrifice, buried their dead in distinctive ways, and built temples and harbor installations similar to those found in Tyre and Sidon. Carthage's early layout also mirrored Phoenician urban models. It was situated on a promontory overlooking a bay, offering both defensibility and access to maritime routes. The city was constructed with a circular walled citadel known as the Byrsa, around which neighborhoods, temples, and harbors developed. Over time, these harbors would evolve into sophisticated dual ports, one for commerce and one for war. demonstrating the technical and economic foresight inherited from Phoenician traditions. However, geography gave Carthage some advantages over its eastern cousins. Unlike Tyre, which was eventually conquered by the Assyrians and later the Babylonians, Carthage was free from the direct pressures of the great empires of the Near East. It could chart its own course, expand westward, and build a regional network of influence. As Tyre's fortunes waned under foreign domination, Carthage's began to rise. This shift in the balance of power had long-term consequences. Carthage gradually took on the role of leader among the western Phoenician colonies. As the eastern cities were absorbed into larger empires, Carthage increasingly acted as a center for trade, diplomacy, and cultural transmission in the western Mediterranean. In essence, the Carthaginians inherited the mantle of Phoenician civilization, preserving its language, religion, and commercial networks while adapting to a new context. Another important factor in Carthage's development was its relationship with the indigenous peoples of North Africa, especially the Libyans and Berbers. Rather than displacing these groups, early Carthaginians integrated them into their society, often through trade, intermarriage, and shared religious practices. Berber auxiliaries would later serve in Carthaginian armies, and many Berber elites adopted Punic customs. This blending of cultures gave Carthage a uniquely hybrid character. It was a Phoenician city in origin, but one deeply connected to Africa. Its language was Semitic, but its worldview was shaped as much by the Sahara and the Atlas Mountains as by the Levantine coast. This cultural duality helped Carthage survive and thrive in its new environment, giving it a broader base of support and a more flexible approach to politics and commerce. By the early 7th century BCE, Carthage had grown far beyond its origins as a Tyrian colony. No longer just a western outpost of Phoenician trade, it was becoming a powerful and independent city in its own right. Its strategic location, strong maritime connections, and flexible political structure allowed it to expand its economic and political influence throughout the Western Mediterranean. This period marks the transformation of Carthage from a colonial settlement into the heart of a new Punic world. Carthage's strength came from its control of commerce. The city's harbor, with access to both inland trade routes and open sea, allowed goods to flow between Africa, Europe, and the Near East. These goods included metals from Iberia, grain and olives from Africa, luxury goods from the East, and manufactured items from Carthage's own workshops. The city's artisans became known for their fine textiles, glassware, and metalwork, all of which were traded across the Mediterranean. This commercial activity depended on one key feature: Carthage's navy. Even in its early years, Carthage maintained a strong tradition of shipbuilding. The Carthaginians developed fast, maneuverable ships capable of traveling long distances and defending cargo from pirates or rival powers. Their fleets protected their merchants and opened new trade routes that connected North Africa with places as far west as the Iberian Peninsula and as far north as southern Gaul. Carthaginian trade was not limited to the open sea. The city's position allowed it to become a crucial link between the Mediterranean and the African interior. Goods such as gold, ivory, and animal hides from sub-Saharan Africa traveled overland to Carthage, often through Berber intermediaries. In return, the Carthaginians offered manufactured goods and salt, an essential resource for preserving food. These inland trade routes helped Carthage develop strong economic relationships with local African tribes, deepening its influence across the region. In addition to trade, Carthage's agricultural development played a central role in its rise. The surrounding land, once considered less fertile than the Nile or the Tigris-Euphrates valleys, was transformed by Punic innovation. Carthaginian farmers mastered irrigation techniques and crop rotation, allowing them to grow olives, grapes, figs, wheat, and barley. Later Roman writers, including Columella and Pliny the Elder, praised Carthaginian agriculture for its efficiency and productivity. The Punic approach to land management ensured a stable food supply and created agricultural surpluses that could support population growth and export. By the 6th century BCE, Carthage was already forming political and commercial alliances throughout the Mediterranean. In some cases, it negotiated treaties with powerful states such as Etruria and early Rome. One of the earliest known treaties between Carthage and Rome dates to the late 6th century BCE. The Roman historian Polybius, writing centuries later, recorded the contents of this agreement. It established boundaries for trade and navigation between the two powers and shows that Carthage was already a force to be reckoned with at sea. While diplomacy was useful, Carthage also began to use military power to defend its interests. This did not mean the large-scale conquests seen in later empires, but rather focused actions to protect trade routes, punish piracy, or control strategic ports. In places like Sardinia, Corsica, and parts of North Africa, Carthage established colonies or garrisons to secure its holdings. These outposts were often founded by wealthy merchant families with support from the state, creating a network of loyal Punic communities across the region. Carthage's expanding influence soon brought it into contact and, at times, conflict with the Greek world. Greek settlers had also been establishing colonies throughout the western Mediterranean, especially in southern Italy and eastern Sicily. While the Greeks and Carthaginians sometimes traded with one another, their competition for resources and territory eventually led to growing tensions. Sicily, in particular, would become a contested space, a key battleground between these two cultural spheres. Within Carthage itself, political power rested in the hands of a merchant aristocracy. These were elite families who had accumulated wealth through trade and agriculture. Carthage did not have kings in this period. Instead, it was governed by a pair of annually elected officials known as suffetes, similar to Roman consuls. These leaders presided over a council of elders and a popular assembly, forming a complex and balanced political system. Unlike the hereditary monarchies of the East, Carthage's leadership structure emphasized merit, wealth, and public service. Elite families competed for influence by sponsoring public works, temples, and festivals. This competition fostered a culture of civic involvement and reinforced loyalty to the state. At the same time, the state maintained strict control over military matters and foreign policy, ensuring that decisions were made in the interest of Carthage as a whole. Religion played an important role in reinforcing Carthaginian identity. The city's temples and religious rituals connected the people to their Phoenician heritage while also adapting to local realities. Chief among the deities was Baal-Hamon, often depicted as a bearded figure with upraised hands, symbolizing power and protection. The goddess Tanit, associated with fertility and the moon, also held a central place in Carthaginian worship. Her symbol, a disc and crescent within a triangle, appeared widely across the city and its colonies. Carthaginian religion also involved rites that would later shock Greek and Roman observers. Ancient sources speak of child sacrifice carried out in times of crisis or as acts of devotion. Archaeological evidence, including burial urns containing the remains of infants and animals, has been found in areas known as tophets. While scholars debate the scale and meaning of these practices, it is clear that religion and sacrifice were taken seriously by the Carthaginian elite. As Carthage grew, so too did its population. By the end of the 6th century BCE, it was likely one of the largest cities in the western Mediterranean, with tens of thousands of residents. Its walls, ports, and markets bustled with activity. The city's social fabric included not only native Carthaginians but also Berbers, freed slaves, foreign merchants, and artisans from across the region. This cosmopolitan character gave Carthage both strength and flexibility, allowing it to absorb new ideas while maintaining its core identity. Education and literacy were also important, especially among the elite. The Punic script, a variant of the Phoenician alphabet, was used in inscriptions, official records, and religious texts. Although much of Carthage's written material has been lost, due in part to its destruction in later centuries, we know that the Carthaginians kept annals of their history, maintained libraries, and recorded laws and commercial agreements. Some Punic inscriptions survive on stone tablets and tombs, offering valuable glimpses into their language and society. As Carthage established itself as a dominant city-state, its influence began to extend well beyond the coast of North Africa. By the 5th century BCE, it had grown into a true maritime power, exerting control over trade routes, founding colonies, and engaging in diplomatic and military encounters across the western Mediterranean. This expansion brought Carthage into close contact with neighboring peoples, some of whom became allies, while others emerged as rivals or threats. The interaction with these groups played a central role in shaping Carthage's future strategy, culture, and political outlook. To the west, Carthaginian explorers and traders reached the Iberian Peninsula, a land rich in natural resources. The region was particularly valued for its abundant silver mines, which became critical to Carthage's economy. By forging alliances with local tribes, such as the Turdetani and Tartessians, the Carthaginians gained access to mineral wealth that allowed them to mint coins, fund trade expeditions, and finance military operations. In return, Iberian communities received goods from Carthage, including pottery, weapons, and luxury items that elevated their status and connected them to broader Mediterranean networks. This Iberian expansion did not occur overnight. It was part of a longer process of Carthaginian engagement in the region, beginning with small settlements and trade posts along the southern coast. These outposts gradually grew into more permanent communities, serving as centers for commerce, administration, and cultural exchange. The Carthaginians did not attempt to fully conquer Iberia during this period. Instead, they relied on diplomacy, trade incentives, and strategic marriages to secure their interests. This cooperative approach laid the groundwork for more direct control in later centuries. North of Carthage, across the Mediterranean, lay the island of Sardinia. This territory, like Iberia, offered valuable resources, particularly metals such as lead, iron, and copper. Sardinia was also home to indigenous Nuragic peoples, who had a long and complex history before Carthaginian arrival. Carthage's interest in the island stemmed both from its economic potential and its strategic location, which allowed them to monitor sea lanes between Africa, Italy, and Gaul. Carthaginian settlements in Sardinia began as small ports and evolved into fortified towns. Over time, Carthage extended its influence inland, coming into conflict with native tribes. Resistance was fierce, and Carthaginian control over the island was never total. However, by maintaining a string of coastal strongholds and projecting naval power, Carthage ensured its dominance over Sardinian waters and the surrounding trade routes. This blend of partial occupation and maritime supremacy became a defining feature of Carthaginian strategy in many regions. Corsica, lying to the north of Sardinia, followed a similar pattern. The island was less developed and more rugged, with fewer resources and smaller populations. Nevertheless, Carthage saw value in establishing a presence there to counter Greek influence and protect its shipping lanes. Corsican communities, often isolated and independent, did not pose the same level of organized resistance as those in Sardinia. Still, maintaining even a minimal presence on the island helped Carthage project strength across the Tyrrhenian Sea and challenged the ambitions of rival powers. One of the most important areas of Carthaginian focus was Sicily. Located just across the narrow Strait of Sicily, the island had long been a melting pot of cultures, including native Sicels, Elymians, and Sicans, as well as colonists from Greece and earlier Phoenician settlers. The Carthaginians considered western Sicily part of their natural sphere of influence, and they sought to maintain control over key ports such as Motia, Panormus, and Solus. The challenge in Sicily came from the growing presence of Greek city-states, particularly those from mainland Greece who had colonized the eastern and southern coasts of the island. Cities like Syracuse, Gela, and Akragas flourished, competing with Carthaginian settlements for land, influence, and resources. As Greek power grew, so did the potential for conflict. Carthage's early interactions with the Greeks in Sicily were marked by cautious diplomacy, but this would not last. Eventually, the competition would escalate into open warfare, setting the stage for a series of bitter and protracted conflicts. To the east, Carthage maintained contact with other Phoenician colonies and Levantine cities, although these ties became more symbolic than practical as time went on. With Tyre and Sidon increasingly under the control of empires like the Assyrians and Babylonians, Carthage assumed a more independent identity. It no longer looked eastward for leadership or protection. Instead, it began to shape its own destiny, forging a Punic culture that blended Phoenician traditions with local African and Western Mediterranean influences. Meanwhile, to the south, Carthage deepened its ties with the Berber peoples of the North African interior. These communities played a vital role in Carthage's rise, supplying manpower, goods, and regional knowledge. In exchange, they gained access to Mediterranean trade networks and Punic technologies. Carthaginian influence extended inland through commercial corridors and fortified posts, but the relationship remained one of mutual benefit rather than conquest. In some regions, Carthage entered into formal alliances with Berber leaders, offering protection or trade privileges in exchange for loyalty. Berber mercenaries became a regular feature of Carthaginian armies, valued for their cavalry skills and knowledge of the terrain. This reliance on diverse ethnic groups would later become a hallmark of Carthage's military structure. Further west along the African coast, Carthaginian explorers and traders ventured beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what is now known as the Strait of Gibraltar. There, they established contacts with Atlantic coastal peoples and possibly even reached the Canary Islands and the coast of modern-day Morocco. One notable figure in this period was Hanno the Navigator, a Carthaginian explorer believed to have led an expedition down the West African coast. Although the exact extent of his journey is debated, ancient accounts suggest that he established trading posts and encountered unfamiliar peoples, animals, and landscapes. These expeditions served two purposes. First, they expanded Carthaginian commercial reach, opening new markets for goods such as gold, ivory, and exotic animals. Second, they demonstrated Carthage's growing confidence and ambition. The city was no longer content to maintain old roots. It sought to discover new ones, secure valuable resources, and outmaneuver competitors. Back in the central Mediterranean, Carthage's rising influence inevitably drew the attention of other powers, especially the Etruscans and the early Roman Republic. In the 6th century BCE, the Etruscans were a dominant force in central Italy, controlling much of the peninsula and maintaining a strong navy. Carthage formed diplomatic ties with Etruria, establishing agreements that allowed for mutual trade and naval cooperation. This alliance helped Carthage counterbalance Greek influence and protect its northern flank. Relations with Rome during this period were more limited but still significant. As mentioned earlier, Carthage and Rome signed treaties to regulate trade and prevent hostilities. These early agreements indicate that both sides recognized each other's power and preferred coexistence to conflict, at least for the time being. By the early 5th century BCE, Carthage had firmly established itself as the dominant commercial power in the Western Mediterranean. But this dominance was not built on land armies or territorial conquest. Instead, it was built on ships, harbors, and the mastery of the sea. In a world where trade flowed along coastlines and through straits, naval power was not just military strength, it was economic lifeblood. Carthage understood this better than any of its rivals, and it used its maritime skill to craft the first true naval empire of the Western Mediterranean. Carthage's naval supremacy did not appear suddenly. It developed over generations of experience, experimentation, and adaptation. Phoenician ancestors had already passed down centuries of seafaring tradition, including knowledge of navigation, shipbuilding, and harbor construction. Carthaginian shipwrights refined these skills to suit the needs of a growing empire. They constructed vessels that were swift, durable, and capable of handling both long voyages and naval combat. Two main types of ships defined the Carthaginian fleet. The first were merchant vessels, broad and deep-hulled, designed to carry large quantities of cargo across great distances. These ships were vital for transporting goods such as grain, olive oil, wine, silver, and textiles between Carthage and its far-flung colonies and allies. The second were warships, primarily biremes and triremes in the early period, sleek and narrow, built for speed and maneuverability. These ships were rowed by trained crews and outfitted with bronze rams at their prows, used to sink or disable enemy vessels in battle. The warships were crewed not only by Carthaginians but also by trained sailors and oarsmen from allied and subject communities. This practice allowed Carthage to maintain large fleets without overburdening its citizen population. Officers and captains, however, were usually drawn from the Carthaginian elite, men with experience in trade, diplomacy, or military affairs. This close connection between commerce and naval leadership helped ensure that military operations served Carthage's broader strategic goals. The centerpiece of Carthaginian naval infrastructure was its harbor system. Nowhere was this more advanced than in Carthage itself. By the 5th century BCE, the city had developed a sophisticated double harbor system, with one section dedicated to commerce and another reserved for the navy. These harbors were protected by stone walls and towers, and the naval harbor, known as the Kothon, was circular, with docking bays for warships arranged in a ring around a central island. This island served as the naval command center, containing facilities for storage, repair, and oversight. This harbor design allowed Carthage to mobilize its fleet quickly and efficiently. Warships could be launched on short notice, and damaged vessels could be serviced without leaving the city. The military harbor could reportedly house over 200 ships, making it one of the largest naval facilities in the ancient world. Though later Roman descriptions of the Kothon may exaggerate some features, archaeological evidence confirms its scale and complexity. Carthaginian naval power was not used solely for defense. It played a central role in projecting influence and protecting trade routes. Carthaginian fleets patrolled the western Mediterranean, ensuring that goods moved safely between colonies and partners. When piracy threatened these routes, Carthage responded with force. When rivals sought to expand into Punic waters, Carthage used its navy to block or drive them back. In this way, the sea became both a highway and a fortress, open to friends, closed to enemies. This control was not without precedent. Other maritime powers, such as the earlier Minoans and the Athenians, had used naval strength to assert dominance, but Carthage's approach was unique in its integration of trade, diplomacy, and military power. The city did not impose a territorial empire in the traditional sense. Instead, it created a web of maritime connections, enforced by naval patrols and regulated by treaties. This model allowed Carthage to grow without overextending its land-based resources. One of the clearest signs of Carthage's naval reach was its regulation of sea traffic through the Strait of Gibraltar. Known in antiquity as the Pillars of Heracles, this narrow passage marked the entrance to the Atlantic. Carthaginian fleets monitored the strait closely, allowing passage only to friendly or neutral parties. This control enabled Carthage to protect its exploratory missions along the West African coast and to secure access to trade with Atlantic peoples. It also allowed the city to restrict Greek or Roman attempts to explore or trade beyond the Mediterranean. In this same spirit, Carthage sometimes employed a policy of secrecy regarding its maritime activities. The story of Hanno the Navigator is a case in point. Hanno was a Carthaginian commander who, according to later Greek sources, led an expedition down the West African coast. He reportedly established colonies, traded with local peoples, and documented strange animals and customs. While the accuracy of the surviving account, known as the Periplus of Hanno, is debated, it shows that Carthage was actively exploring regions far beyond the Mediterranean. This outward expansion served both economic and strategic purposes. Access to gold, ivory, and exotic goods made Carthage a desirable trade partner and increased its wealth. At the same time, the creation of distant outposts strengthened its geopolitical position, allowing it to influence regions outside the reach of its rivals. These expeditions also demonstrated the adaptability and ambition of Carthaginian seafaring culture. Internally, the navy played an important role in Carthaginian society. Shipbuilding and maritime professions provided employment and technical knowledge. Ports and docks became centers of commerce and innovation. Naval service was a source of prestige for elite families, many of whom funded ships or captained fleets as part of their public duties. Religious rituals were also connected to the sea. Offerings to Tanit and Baal-Hamon were made before major voyages, and temples near the harbor reinforced the spiritual significance of Carthage's maritime mission. Carthage's rivals took note of its naval strength. Greek city-states, particularly those in Sicily, viewed Carthage as a competitor. In some cases, Greek writers expressed admiration for Carthaginian skill. In others, they saw Carthage as a dangerous and secretive power. This tension would eventually lead to direct conflict, but during the 5th century BCE, a cautious balance remained in place. Carthage maintained its sea routes and watched as Greek colonists expanded in areas such as Magna Graecia and the eastern parts of Sicily. Rome, during this same period, was still a modest republic with little naval capacity. The Romans respected Carthage's dominance at sea and, in their earliest treaties, accepted limitations on their trade and naval movement. Carthage, for its part, saw Rome as a land power with potential, but not yet a serious maritime rival. This view would change in the centuries to come, but during the 5th century BCE, Carthage was unquestionably the master of Western Mediterranean waters. As Carthage expanded its reach and solidified its naval and economic dominance across the Western Mediterranean, it inevitably began to develop a more centralized and organized leadership structure to manage its growing interests. This evolution marked the beginning of Carthage's transformation from a city led by shifting elite factions to one steered by powerful political families. The first of these families to emerge as a dominant force in Carthaginian affairs was the Magenid dynasty, which played a critical role in shaping the city's early military and political trajectory during the late 6th and early 5th centuries BCE. The Magenids were not kings in the traditional sense. Carthage by this time had no monarchy. Instead, it operated under a republican system in which the highest officials, known as suffets, were elected annually. However, powerful families could maintain long-term influence by repeatedly gaining election, forming alliances within the ruling council, and controlling key aspects of the economy and military. The Magenids were masters of this system. Through strategic appointments, battlefield success, and careful management of public image, they became the de facto rulers of Carthage for nearly a century. The dynasty's founder, Mago I, emerged as a significant figure in the early 6th century BCE. Little is known about his early life, but historical sources suggest that he came to prominence through military leadership and administrative skill. Mago is often credited with creating the foundations of Carthage's land army, complementing its already formidable navy. He reorganized military structure, developed standardized recruitment practices, and promoted the use of foreign mercenaries, a practice that would become a hallmark of Carthaginian warfare. Carthage's reliance on mercenaries was both a necessity and a strategic choice. With a relatively small citizen population compared to its ambitions, Carthage could not field large armies solely from its own ranks. Instead, it recruited soldiers from allied and subject peoples, especially from North Africa, Iberia, and the central Mediterranean. These troops included Berber infantry, Iberian slingers, and Numidian cavalry, all of whom brought unique skills and combat styles. By mixing these units under Punic leadership, Carthage created flexible and diverse armies capable of adapting to different terrains and opponents. Under Mago I's guidance, Carthage also began to assert more direct control over its territories in North Africa, pushing further inland and consolidating power among Berber tribes. While earlier relations had been based primarily on trade and alliances, this new phase saw Carthage establishing garrisons, collecting tribute, and integrating local leaders into its administrative system. These moves ensured greater stability along Carthage's landward frontier and provided a steady supply of recruits and resources for military campaigns. The most notable aspect of Mago's leadership, however, was his initiation of a series of wars in Sicily. By the late 6th century BCE, the island had become a focal point of competition between Carthaginians and Greeks. Carthage controlled several key settlements in western Sicily, while Greek colonies such as Syracuse, Gela, and Acragas dominated the east. The island's rich farmland, strategic location, and growing urban centers made it a valuable and hotly contested prize. The first major Carthaginian intervention in Sicilian affairs during the Magenid era came under the command of Mago's descendants. His sons and grandsons, particularly Hasdrubal and Hamilcar, continued his expansionist policies and led campaigns against Greek forces. These wars were brutal, prolonged, and marked by shifting alliances among local Sicilian peoples. Carthage's aim was not to conquer all of Sicily, but to secure its western holdings and prevent Greek expansion into Punic-controlled areas. One of the Magenid dynasty's most enduring impacts was the way it institutionalized Carthaginian military engagement. While previous conflicts had been reactive or limited, the Magenids pursued a long-term strategy of military readiness and territorial defense. They also established precedents for how Carthage would conduct war, using hired troops, building fortified bases, and relying on experienced generals from elite families. These patterns would remain central to Carthaginian warfare for centuries. In addition to their military activities, the Magenids left a mark on Carthaginian society and government. Their success on the battlefield gave them considerable influence in the ruling council, and they used this to shape domestic policy. They promoted construction projects, improved infrastructure, and supported religious institutions that reinforced Carthaginian identity. Temples to Baal Hammon and Tanit were expanded or newly built during this period, symbolizing both devotion and political legitimacy. Yet the dynasty's power was not without limits. Carthage's republican system still functioned, and opposition could arise from rival families or dissatisfied factions within the elite. The Magenids had to navigate these internal politics carefully, balancing ambition with consensus. Their long tenure was due not only to military success, but also to their ability to present themselves as protectors of Carthaginian prosperity and tradition. One example of the Magenids' diplomatic finesse was their handling of treaties with external powers. During this period, Carthage signed agreements with the Etruscans and other Italic peoples, aiming to counterbalance Greek influence and secure favorable terms for trade and navigation. These treaties show a keen awareness of Mediterranean politics and a willingness to use diplomacy as a complement to military action. The final years of the Magenid dynasty were marked by a major challenge, the Battle of Himera. In the early 5th century BCE, Carthage launched a large-scale invasion of Sicily under the leadership of Hamilcar, a member of the Magenid house. The goal was to defeat the Greek city of Himera and assert Punic dominance over the island. However, the campaign ended in disaster. The Greek forces, led by Gelon of Syracuse and Theron of Acragas, inflicted a crushing defeat on the Carthaginians. Hamilcar was killed in the battle, and much of the army was destroyed. The defeat at Himera was a turning point. It exposed the limits of Carthaginian power in Sicily and led to a period of caution in foreign policy. The Magenid dynasty's dominance also began to wane as rival families and political groups questioned the wisdom of aggressive expansion. While the Magenids did not disappear entirely, their influence diminished, and Carthage began to experiment with broader political participation and more collective decision-making. As Carthage expanded westward and deepened its influence across the Mediterranean, one region became a continuous source of conflict, ambition, and rivalry: Sicily. This large island, situated almost perfectly between North Africa and southern Italy, served as a natural crossroads of trade, culture, and military strategy. By the early 5th century BCE, Sicily had become the center of a high-stakes struggle between two of the Mediterranean's most dynamic civilizations, the Carthaginians and the Greeks. Greek colonization of Sicily had begun in earnest during the 8th century BCE. Driven by population pressures and the search for fertile land, Greek settlers established a number of city-states along the island's eastern and southern coasts. Cities like Syracuse, Gela, Acragas, and Selinus developed into prosperous centers of trade and culture, forming a vibrant network of Hellenic influence in the central Mediterranean. At the same time, Phoenician settlers, many of whom were aligned culturally and politically with Carthage, had already established their own outposts on the western side of the island. Cities such as Motia, Panormus, and Solus became extensions of the broader Punic trade network. As Carthage grew in power and began exerting control over these settlements, the division of Sicily became increasingly defined. The western half aligned with Carthage, while the eastern half gravitated toward the Greeks. This geographic divide soon hardened into political and military tension. While trade and diplomacy occurred intermittently, both powers saw Sicily as critical to their regional ambitions. For Carthage, control over western Sicily ensured the security of maritime routes and maintained a buffer zone against Hellenic expansion. For the Greeks, especially the powerful city of Syracuse, containing Carthaginian influence was essential to preserving their autonomy and asserting dominance in the region. The first large-scale conflict between Carthage and the Greeks on Sicilian soil erupted in the early 5th century BCE. This came during the reign of Gelon, the tyrant of Syracuse, whose military and political reforms had elevated his city into the most powerful Greek state on the island. Gelon sought to expand Greek influence across Sicily and viewed the Punic presence in the west as a strategic threat. Carthage, in turn, feared the rise of a unified Greek bloc under Syracuse. The Punic leadership, dominated at this time by the Magenid dynasty, decided to respond with force. In what would become the largest Carthaginian military campaign of the period, an army was assembled and transported across the sea with the objective of capturing the city of Himera, a Greek stronghold located near the border of the Carthaginian and Greek spheres of influence. This led to the pivotal Battle of Himera in the year 480 BCE, one of the most significant confrontations of the early Punic Greek Wars. The Carthaginian expedition was led by Hamilcar, a general from the Magenid family, who commanded a diverse force composed of North African troops, Iberian mercenaries, Sardinian auxiliaries, and Punic officers. The size of the force, according to ancient sources, may have been exaggerated, but it was certainly among the largest Carthage had ever assembled at that point. The Greeks, under the leadership of Gelon of Syracuse and his ally Theron of Acragas, met the Carthaginian threat with a highly organized defense. They had the advantage of fighting on home ground and possessed a more cohesive army, largely made up of citizen hoplites trained in the phalanx formation. According to ancient historians, the Greeks managed to surprise the Carthaginian camp and inflicted a devastating defeat. The consequences of the Battle of Himera were severe for Carthage. Hamilcar was either killed in battle or committed suicide to avoid capture, and much of his army was either slain or scattered. The defeat marked a dramatic setback for Carthaginian ambitions in Sicily and triggered internal unrest in Carthage itself. It also signaled to the Greeks that Carthage could be challenged and even defeated in a direct military engagement. However, the story of Carthaginian involvement in Sicily did not end with Himera. Rather than withdrawing from the island entirely, Carthage regrouped. For the remainder of the 5th century BCE, the city pursued a more cautious strategy. It maintained its hold over western Sicily, fortified its settlements, and invested in rebuilding its navy and army. Carthage was determined not to be driven from a region so vital to its interests. The balance of power on the island remained fragile. Greek cities continued to compete among themselves, and no single polis was able to dominate the entire eastern half of Sicily. This internal division among the Greeks allowed Carthage to maintain its foothold and wait for an opportunity to strike back. That opportunity came several decades later when tensions between the Greek cities themselves led to renewed instability. In the early decades of the 4th century BCE, the tyrant Dionysius of Syracuse rose to power. A gifted military commander and ambitious ruler, Dionysius sought to unite Sicily under Syracusan leadership and to expel the Carthaginians entirely from the island. His campaigns against Carthaginian strongholds were marked by both success and failure. He launched repeated attacks on Punic cities, including Motia, which he managed to capture after a brutal siege. In response, Carthage dispatched a new generation of generals and reinforcements to reclaim lost territory. The struggle became a series of back-and-forth campaigns, with neither side able to achieve decisive and lasting dominance. Carthage adapted to these challenges by modifying its military and political approach. The city began to appoint generals with greater autonomy and longer terms, allowing them to develop coherent campaigns rather than relying solely on short-term commands. Leaders like Hamilcar and Mago, figures from a new generation of Carthaginian military aristocracy, implemented more flexible tactics and engaged in siege warfare, naval blockades, and psychological operations. One of the most dramatic episodes of this era occurred during the siege of Syracuse itself. After initial successes, the Carthaginian general Hamilcar attempted to take the city directly. But a plague broke out in the Punic camp, devastating his forces and forcing a retreat. The failure, though not as catastrophic as Himera, was another reminder of the limits of Carthaginian power in Sicily. Despite these setbacks, Carthage managed to hold on to its western Sicilian territories. It rebuilt Maggia as Lilybaeum, developed new fortifications, and reinforced its naval presence. The city's policy became one of defense and deterrence rather than outright conquest. The western part of the island became a Punic bastion, while the eastern cities remained largely in Greek hands. By the end of the 4th century BCE, Carthage had weathered more than a century of intermittent warfare in Sicily. It had suffered defeats, endured plagues, and faced strong adversaries, yet it had also demonstrated resilience, adaptability, and determination. Its colonies remained intact, its economy continued to grow, and its leadership maintained internal stability despite external challenges. The wars in Sicily had long-lasting effects. They taught Carthage the value of patience and preparation. They deepened its reliance on mercenary armies and led to innovations in military command. They also shaped the city's identity. Carthage was now not only a commercial power but a military one, engaged in a prolonged struggle with one of the Mediterranean's other great cultures. The Battle of Himera, fought in the year 480 BCE, marked a defining moment in the early external conflicts of Carthage. Though Carthage had previously engaged in skirmishes and regional wars, the scale of the defeat at Himera was unprecedented and forced a reckoning within the Carthaginian political and military establishment. The consequences of this single battle extended far beyond the battlefield. It reshaped Carthage's approach to warfare, its internal governance, and its long-term foreign policy. The loss at Himera came as a shock. Under the leadership of Hamilcar, a seasoned general from the Magenid family, Carthage had launched a well-organized military campaign with the intention of defeating the rising Greek powers in Sicily and asserting its dominance over the island. Carthage had mustered a large force consisting of its core North African troops as well as mercenaries drawn from Iberia, Sardinia, and various Berber tribes. The fleet was carefully coordinated, and the landing in Sicily proceeded as planned. Yet, despite the scale and preparation, the Punic forces were decisively defeated by the Greek coalition under Galon of Syracuse and Theron of Acragas. Ancient sources offer differing accounts of Hamilcar's fate. Some claim he died in combat, while others suggest he committed suicide on the battlefield in ritual sacrifice. Regardless of the details, the defeat was total. The Greek forces not only won the engagement, but reportedly destroyed much of the Carthaginian camp and captured or killed a significant portion of the army. The impact reverberated back to Carthage, where the political elite faced intense scrutiny for their failure. In the immediate aftermath, Carthage entered a period of internal reform and reflection. The Magenid dynasty, which had guided the state for decades, saw its power weakened. The loss undermined the prestige that had allowed the Magenids to dominate the political scene, and rival aristocratic families used the moment to push for changes in leadership and policy. While the Magenids would continue to be influential in later generations, their era of unquestioned dominance effectively ended with Himera. Carthaginian politics, never strictly monarchic, became more consciously republican in tone following the defeat. Power shifted further toward the Council of Elders, a body composed of aristocratic leaders who managed both domestic and foreign affairs. This council worked closely with the annually elected suffetes, who served as the city's chief magistrates. The aftermath of Himera appears to have spurred greater efforts at political consensus, reducing reliance on military strongmen and increasing collective decision-making at the highest levels. Military reforms were also introduced. The disaster at Himera had exposed significant vulnerabilities in the organization and structure of the Punic army. While the reliance on mercenaries was not abandoned, indeed it remained a central feature of Carthaginian warfare, the state took steps to professionalize command structures and improve coordination among its diverse forces. Recruitment systems were refined, and new procedures were introduced to vet and manage foreign troops. Greater emphasis was placed on leadership training and strategic planning. One notable outcome of these reforms was the growing importance of fortified strongholds throughout Carthage's overseas territories. In the years following Himera, Carthage invested heavily in the construction and enhancement of defensive positions in Sicily, Sardinia, and North Africa. These fortresses served not only as military installations, but also as administrative hubs and symbols of Carthaginian authority. In Sicily, cities such as Motia were expanded and fortified to ensure that future attacks could be resisted more effectively. Naval security also became a renewed priority. Though the defeat at Himera was primarily a land engagement, the protection of sea routes had never been more critical. Carthage reinforced its harbors and expanded its fleet, seeking to maintain control over key maritime corridors while preventing potential blockades or surprise invasions. The city's naval engineers refined ship designs to improve speed and maneuverability, and experienced commanders were given longer terms to oversee extended missions. On the economic front, Carthage responded to the military setback by doubling down on trade and agriculture to ensure financial stability. Losses in Sicily had been costly, but they had not crippled the core economy. Carthaginian merchants continued to operate across the Mediterranean, and agricultural estates in North Africa provided grain, oil, and livestock in abundance. New colonies were established along the western African coast and in southern Iberia, ensuring a diversified flow of resources. These commercial ventures funded not only domestic recovery, but also the rearmament of Carthaginian forces. Religion, too, played a significant role in shaping public responses to the defeat. In a society where divine favor was closely associated with military success, the loss at Himera led to increased religious activity. Carthaginians offered sacrifices to Baal Hammon and Tanit in hopes of regaining divine support. Archaeological evidence from Carthage and its colonies shows a noticeable rise in religious dedications during the decades following the battle. Rituals were more frequent, temples were renovated, and priesthoods gained increased influence in civic life. Some historians have argued that the intensity of religious expression during this period may reflect a collective desire to restore cosmic order after a major trauma. Whether or not such interpretations hold universally, there is no doubt that the Punic elite leaned heavily on religious institutions to reinforce unity and resilience among the population. Another area that saw transformation after Himera was Carthage's approach to foreign relations. The battle had demonstrated the danger of underestimating a well-organized enemy, particularly when that enemy had the advantage of unity and local support. Future Carthaginian campaigns in Sicily became more cautious, more strategic, and more measured in their objectives. The city invested in long-term diplomacy with local allies, built stronger fortifications, and avoided large-scale confrontations unless victory could be ensured through overwhelming preparation. This did not mean that Carthage abandoned its ambitions. Rather, it adapted. In later decades, Carthaginian generals would return to Sicily with better strategies, improved logistics, and more stable political backing. The island remained a central focus of Punic foreign policy, but the experience of Himera taught Carthage that it could not afford reckless military gambles. The psychological impact of Himera also lingered. Carthage became more defensive in posture, more methodical in planning, and more resilient in times of crisis. The city learned that survival as a Mediterranean power required more than ships and silver. It demanded coordination, discipline, and strategic foresight. These lessons would shape Carthaginian behavior for generations and help explain its durability in the face of future threats. In the cultural realm, Carthage began to express a more distinct identity in the decades following the defeat. While always rooted in Phoenician tradition, Punic culture became increasingly localized and self-defined. Artistic styles, religious symbolism, and burial practices in this period show a growing confidence in Carthage's own uniqueness. This cultural self-awareness contributed to a renewed sense of purpose and destiny, even as the city recovered from military setbacks. In the generations that followed the defeat at Himera, Carthage demonstrated one of its most defining traits: its capacity for adaptation and renewal. While military ambitions in Sicily remained cautious for some time, Carthage did not retreat into isolation or decline. Instead, it turned its focus toward the development of its broader empire, particularly along the Iberian Peninsula and the North African interior. These regions, rich in natural resources and strategic importance, became central to Carthage's long-term revival and imperial structure. Carthaginian interest in the Iberian Peninsula predated the defeat at Himera. Phoenician settlements along the southern coast of Iberia, such as Gadir, modern-day Cadiz, had been established as early as the 8th century BCE. These outposts were originally intended as trading hubs and resupply stations for ships sailing between the eastern Mediterranean and the Atlantic coasts of Africa and Europe. Over time, however, Carthage inherited and expanded this Phoenician network, integrating it into its own system of colonial administration and economic exploitation. The attraction of Iberia was manifold. First and foremost, the region was abundant in mineral wealth. Silver, in particular, was found in significant quantities in the southern and southeastern parts of the peninsula. Carthaginian mining operations, some of which were massive for their time, extracted silver to mint coinage, pay troops, and fund diplomatic missions. Iberian tin, copper, and iron were also of great value, supporting both trade and military production. Carthaginian involvement in Iberia was not limited to the coast. Through a combination of alliances, marriages, and military expeditions, Punic influence penetrated far into the interior. Local Iberian tribes, such as the Turdetani and the Bastitani, often cooperated with Carthaginian officials in exchange for goods, protection, or political favors. Carthage, in return, maintained a flexible approach, employing both direct governance in strategic settlements and indirect rule through local intermediaries in more distant areas. Cities such as Carthago Nova, meaning New Carthage, though established later during the Barcid era, would eventually become major administrative centers. But even before such urban developments took full form, Carthaginian presence in Iberia laid the foundation for a regional base of operations that would support future military campaigns and secure economic lifelines. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean in North Africa, Carthage deepened its engagement with the interior regions that stretched beyond the coastal cities. The terrain here varied widely, from the fertile plains near the sea to the semi-arid steppe and mountainous highlands further inland. Berber communities, long partners and sometime rivals of Carthage, occupied these lands. While Carthaginian relations with the Berbers had always been important, the post-Himera period saw more structured efforts to incorporate these peoples into the Punic imperial system. Carthage adopted a multi-pronged approach. In some areas, it established direct colonies or military garrisons, securing vital trade routes and agricultural zones. In others, it relied on treaties and mutual defense agreements. The result was a tapestry of alliances that gave Carthage access to manpower, supplies, and geographic depth. Berber cavalry, famed for their speed and resilience, became a permanent and valued feature of Carthaginian armies. Agriculture in North Africa also flourished during this period. Carthaginian innovations in farming techniques, including crop rotation, irrigation channels, and careful soil management, transformed what had previously been considered marginal land into productive estates. These estates, often owned by wealthy Carthaginian families, produced grain, olives, figs, grapes, and pulses in abundance. Some scholars have argued that Carthaginian agriculture during this period was among the most advanced in the Mediterranean world, rivaling even Egypt and the Greek heartlands in output and efficiency. The economic surplus generated from these North African estates allowed Carthage to fund further colonial activities and ensure food security for both its homeland and its far-flung territories. It also supported the city's growing population, which by the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE had reached substantial levels. Estimates suggest that Carthage may have housed well over 100,000 residents, making it one of the largest cities in the ancient world outside of the Eastern empires. The influx of resources from Iberia and North Africa also helped to stabilize Carthage's political system following the political turbulence of the earlier century. With new wealth and a broader tax base, the ruling council of elders could fund public works, maintain the navy, and support mercenary armies without relying too heavily on emergency levies or unpopular measures. In turn, this financial stability reduced internal factionalism and allowed for a more consistent and strategic approach to foreign policy. This period of recovery also saw a refinement in Carthaginian diplomacy. With the memory of the Himera defeat still fresh, Carthage sought to avoid direct confrontation with other Mediterranean powers when possible. Instead, it focused on forming alliances, negotiating treaties, and leveraging its economic influence to secure favorable outcomes. Trade agreements with Etruscans, Italic peoples, and even some Greek states helped ensure the continued flow of goods and reduced the risk of sudden military escalation. Carthage also used its economic reach to create soft power. Punic merchants were a common sight in foreign ports, and Punic goods, including pottery, jewelry, and textiles, were widely distributed and highly valued. In many cases, these commercial ties paved the way for political influence, as foreign elites came to rely on Carthaginian trade for wealth and prestige. This strategy allowed Carthage to expand its sphere of influence without the costs and risks associated with conquest. Religious and cultural developments accompanied these shifts. The temples of Baal Hammon and Tanit continued to be centers of communal life, but there was also increasing local adaptation of Punic religious practices in Iberia and North Africa. Altars, sanctuaries, and votive offerings found in the archaeological records suggest that while Carthaginian religious norms were often maintained, they were also integrated with local traditions. This cultural blending helped reinforce Carthage's legitimacy among its colonial and allied populations. Additionally, Punic language and script spread alongside economic and political structures. Inscriptions in Punic, modeled on Phoenician writing but adapted to local use, began to appear across Iberia and the Maghreb. While not all communities adopted Punic as their primary language, its presence as a medium of administration and trade demonstrated the growing cultural influence of Carthage across the Western Mediterranean. The successes in Iberia and North Africa not only secured Carthage's recovery, but also gave it the foundation to act on a wider stage once again. By the early 4th century BCE, Carthage had regained its confidence and capabilities. The city had learned from its past mistakes, strengthened its political institutions, diversified its economy, and expanded its reach. It had transformed itself from a wounded maritime power into a rejuvenated imperial force. Yet, challenges remained. The Greek cities of Sicily had not disappeared, and their ambitions continued to collide with Punic interests. Furthermore, new powers were beginning to emerge in the Italian peninsula, most notably Rome, a city that, while not yet a direct threat, was growing in strength and scope. Carthage's renewed stability would soon be tested by these shifting dynamics. By the early 4th century BCE, Carthage had emerged from the trials of earlier decades as a stronger, more strategically organized power. Its influence stretched across the Western Mediterranean, its economy was thriving, and its colonial networks had deepened in both Iberia and North Africa. Yet, alongside these outward expansions, Carthage underwent a profound transformation at home, one that would shape the character of its government and the functioning of its empire for the next several centuries. Carthage, unlike many of its contemporaries, had long operated without a formal monarchy. Although powerful dynastic families such as the Magenids had once exercised significant influence, the city never adopted a system of hereditary kingship. Instead, Carthaginian political life was rooted in a complex and evolving republican structure that emphasized the balance of competing elites, the role of institutions, and collective governance. At the core of this system was the office of the suffetes, a term often translated by Roman and Greek writers as equivalent to judges or magistrates. Two suffets were elected annually to serve as the highest civic officials in the city. Their powers included presiding over legal matters, issuing decrees, and managing diplomatic relations. Though their authority was considerable, it was limited by short terms and the expectation that they govern collaboratively. The annual nature of the suffetship ensured that no single individual could dominate Carthaginian politics for long. This aspect of the constitution created a rhythm of accountability and kept leadership firmly within the hands of the aristocracy, without allowing it to become tyrannical. While not democratic in the modern sense, the system prevented the concentration of power seen in monarchies or military dictatorships. Supporting the suffetes was the Council of Elders, or adirim, composed of several hundred members from the city's leading families. This body served as the primary legislative and advisory group, crafting policy, debating foreign affairs, and making key decisions about war, finance, and public works. Membership in the council was not elected by the general population, but drawn from aristocratic lineages with proven wealth and service to the state. The Council of Elders played a stabilizing role, especially in the wake of earlier military defeats and political disruptions. Its collective wisdom and conservative orientation provided continuity and institutional memory. Carthaginian politics favored deliberation and consensus over impulsive decisions, a quality that helped the city avoid internal upheaval and manage its vast imperial interests with pragmatism. Another powerful institution within the Carthaginian system was the Tribunal of the 104. This body functioned primarily as a court of oversight, with a specific mandate to monitor the conduct of military generals and high officials. Its origins may have been rooted in popular resentment over mismanagement during campaigns like the one at Himera. Over time, the tribunal became a critical tool for curbing corruption and maintaining discipline among the ruling class. Generals who failed in battle or were suspected of dishonesty could be tried and punished, even sentenced to death by this tribunal. While harsh by some standards, this mechanism reflected the deep seriousness with which Carthage treated military and civic responsibility. It was not uncommon for commanders returning from campaigns to face intense scrutiny, with their entire careers judged on the outcomes of a few key decisions. The growing complexity of Carthaginian governance also extended to its economic administration. As trade and agriculture expanded, new systems were put in place to regulate tariffs, manage colonial tribute, and oversee public spending. Records were kept in Punic script, and officials were appointed to supervise tax collection, construction projects, and grain distribution. Though few Carthaginian documents survive today, references from Greek and Roman sources suggest a remarkably efficient bureaucracy for the time. This bureaucratic system helped Carthage manage its colonies with a light but effective touch. While direct rule was limited to major urban centers and strategic ports, local elites were often co-opted into the administrative structure through incentives and contracts. In many cases, indigenous communities retained their own customs and leaders, so long as they acknowledged Carthaginian authority and fulfilled economic obligations. This decentralized model of governance allowed Carthage to maintain control over a vast and diverse empire with relatively limited manpower. An important factor in the stability of the Carthaginian Republic was the close integration between political power and economic influence. Unlike societies where military elites or hereditary nobles dominated, Carthage's ruling class was composed primarily of wealthy merchant families. These families made their fortunes through trade, agriculture, and manufacturing, and they used their resources to fund public projects, religious institutions, and naval expeditions. In return, political office offered opportunities to shape policy, access new markets, and forge diplomatic ties. The overlap between economic and political leadership meant that those in power had a vested interest in the prosperity and stability of the state. Civic virtue in Carthage was expressed not through military conquest alone, but through the building of infrastructure, the funding of temples, and the promotion of commerce. Religious institutions played a complementary role in Carthaginian republican life. The priesthood, especially those serving the cults of Baal-Hamon and Tanit, maintained significant influence. Temples were not only places of worship but also centers of economic activity, land management, and social services. Donations to the temples by leading families were both acts of piety and demonstrations of public responsibility. The blending of religious and civic duties helped bind the community together. Festivals, processions, and public sacrifices reinforced a shared identity and offered opportunities for political figures to display their generosity and devotion. The city's monumental architecture, including temples, harbors, and public squares, served as physical reminders of the partnership between the gods and the state. Education and literacy, while not universal, were valued among the elite. Carthaginian boys from wealthy families were taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, often with a focus on commercial and administrative skills. Punic inscriptions, gravestones, and dedications indicate a high degree of written communication within the ruling class. Contracts, treaties, and legal documents were commonly recorded in script, providing the framework for a sophisticated legal culture. Despite the strength of its institutions, the Carthaginian Republic was not immune to challenges. Factional rivalries occasionally emerged within the Council of Elders, and debates over foreign policy or military appointments could become heated. However, the system as a whole was designed to absorb and manage such tensions. Procedures for conflict resolution, mechanisms for accountability, and traditions of shared governance all worked together to preserve civic order. One of the most distinctive features of Carthaginian politics was the lack of a singular public orator or charismatic figurehead. Unlike Greek city-states, where politicians such as Pericles or Alcibiades could dominate political life, Carthage operated on collective authority and institutional discipline. This diffused leadership style contributed to the republic's resilience, making it less vulnerable to the risks of personal ambition or demagoguery. Over time, this mature republican system allowed Carthage to take on increasingly complex responsibilities. It could coordinate long-distance trade, conduct diplomacy with rival powers, manage a network of colonies, and deploy military forces on multiple fronts, all while maintaining internal stability. This balance of flexibility and control was one of the key strengths of Carthage's imperial model. By the middle of the 3rd century BCE, Carthage had firmly established itself as the preeminent power in the Western Mediterranean. With its vast empire stretching across North Africa, Iberia, and Sicily, its economy thriving through trade and its military strengthened by years of experience, Carthage stood as a formidable force. However, the rise of Rome, a small city-state on the Italian peninsula, began to challenge Carthage's dominance. The clash between these two powers would become inevitable, and it was in the crucible of war that the rivalry between Carthage and Rome would truly take shape. Sicily, a strategically vital island located between Carthage and Rome, became the flashpoint for the conflict. By this time, Sicily was home to a mix of indigenous peoples, Greek colonies, and Carthaginian settlements. While the western part of the island was controlled by Carthage, the eastern part was dominated by Greek cities such as Syracuse, which had been steadily gaining power. As both powers' influence over the island grew, tensions began to mount. Though Carthage had already fought against Greek city-states on the island, it had never faced a power quite like Rome, which had begun to make its own expansionist strides. The immediate cause of the First Punic War was a dispute over the city of Messana, located on the northeastern tip of Sicily. In 264 BCE, the Mamertines, a mercenary group originally from Campania, seized Messana. Initially, they had sought the protection of Carthage, But when they felt the threat of being absorbed into the Carthaginian sphere of influence, they turned to Rome for assistance. Rome, seeing an opportunity to assert its growing power, agreed to intervene, thus establishing its first significant involvement in Sicilian affairs. Carthage, which had long considered the island a vital part of its maritime empire, was alarmed by Rome's growing presence. The Punic response was swift. Carthage moved to secure its holdings in western Sicily and to establish military control over Messana. At this point, both powers were on a collision course. A struggle over Sicily, a strategic and wealthy island, was now inevitable. The war that followed would not be decided quickly. Unlike the wars Carthage had fought in the past, such as those against Greek city-states or local rivals, the First Punic War would pit Carthage against a new kind of adversary. Rome was a rising military power, its legions steadily growing in strength and discipline. While Carthage's power was based on its naval superiority and wealth derived from its empire, Rome was still largely an infantry-based army. This difference in military structure would be a significant factor throughout the war. The early stages of the conflict saw both sides engaged in naval skirmishes. Carthage, with its superior navy, initially had the advantage at sea. Its fleet was large and well-established, built on years of experience in naval warfare and trade. However, Rome, recognizing the importance of the sea, quickly adapted. They constructed their own fleet at an astonishing rate, largely through the innovation of the corvus, a boarding device designed to allow Roman soldiers to board enemy ships and fight hand-to-hand, thus leveraging their superior land-based infantry skills. The development of the corvus marked a key moment in the war. It allowed the Romans to level the playing field in naval combat and exploit their strengths. For the Carthaginians, who had long relied on their experienced naval officers and fleets to control the Mediterranean, the corvus was a disruptive innovation. Although their ships were more agile and better suited for traditional naval combat, the Romans now had a method of turning naval battles into something more akin to land combat, where they could use their trained legions. As the war progressed, both sides suffered heavy losses. The Carthaginian fleet, though superior in some respects, was not invulnerable. The Romans, under the command of experienced generals such as Gaius Duilius, began to score victories at sea despite being newcomers to naval warfare. One of the decisive battles of the war was the Battle of Himera in 264 BCE, where the Romans achieved a significant victory over the Carthaginian fleet, marking the first major naval engagement in Roman history. The victory at Himera not only boosted Roman morale, but also demonstrated their ability to compete with the mighty Carthaginian navy. In addition to naval battles, the war also saw intense fighting on land. Carthage, with its vast resources and strategic control of Sicily's western half, was able to move troops quickly across the island. However, Rome's legions, despite initial difficulties, proved to be increasingly effective in Sicily. The Romans began to consolidate control over eastern Sicily, and over time, their foothold expanded. A prolonged siege of the Carthaginian stronghold of Lilybaeum, modern-day Marsala, in the western part of the island, became one of the central military objectives for both sides. The Carthaginians, on the other hand, were forced to divert resources from their navy to defend their territory. Their reliance on mercenaries and their inability to effectively coordinate ground forces in the face of Roman persistence became a significant issue. Over time, the Carthaginians struggled to reinforce their positions on the island, while Rome's ability to recruit and sustain its army proved a decisive advantage. The Romans were also able to implement more effective siege tactics, gradually wearing down Carthaginian fortifications. While the land war was waged with varying success, the Carthaginian navy remained a central factor throughout the conflict. The Punic fleet carried out several raids along the Italian coast and attempted to relieve their forces in Sicily. However, as the war dragged on, Carthage's naval power began to wane. The Romans, who had initially struggled with naval combat, now had a fleet that could challenge Carthage on its home turf. The war's turning point came in the Battle of the Aegaean Islands in 241 BCE. By this time, Carthage was exhausted, Their fleet had been weakened by years of continuous combat, and their resources were stretched thin. In a final attempt to regain the upper hand, the Carthaginian navy clashed with the Roman fleet one last time near the Aegates Islands off the western coast of Sicily. The Romans, having learned from their previous mistakes and strengthened by years of battle, decisively defeated the Carthaginians. This victory essentially ended Carthage's ability to maintain its military presence in Sicily and forced it to sue for peace. The terms of the peace settlement were harsh for Carthage. The treaty required Carthage to surrender all control over Sicily to Rome, marking the first major territorial loss in the history of the Punic Empire. Furthermore, Carthage was forced to pay a massive indemnity to Rome, which strained its resources even further. Carthage, once the uncontested power in the western Mediterranean, had been forced to cede control of one of its most important territories to a rising power. The aftermath of the First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, left Carthage in a weakened state, its empire having suffered a significant territorial loss. Yet, despite its defeat, Carthage's resilience shone through as it began the process of rebuilding. The loss of Sicily to Rome was more than a mere blow to Carthage's territorial holdings. It was a sharp setback to its prestige and its ability to control key maritime trade routes. Yet, in the ashes of defeat, Carthage found new leaders and adapted its policies to confront the challenges ahead. One of the most consequential developments in Carthage after the First Punic War was its shifting political landscape. The peace treaty with Rome, which required Carthage to pay a substantial indemnity, left the state financially strained. Carthage had to rely on its remaining territories, including its holdings in Iberia, to regain its footing. It was in Iberia that the seeds of future conflict with Rome were sown, particularly through the actions of the Barca family, one of Carthage's most powerful military dynasties. The Barcid family, led by Hamilcar Barca, was instrumental in ensuring that Carthage's recovery was not simply a matter of rebuilding what had been lost. Hamilcar, who had led Carthage during the later stages of the First Punic War, turned to Iberia in the immediate aftermath of the war. By establishing Carthaginian control over key parts of the Iberian Peninsula, Hamilcar sought to create a new economic base to replenish Carthage's wealth, which had been drained by the war and the terms of the peace treaty. Iberia was of immense strategic importance to Carthage. It was rich in resources such as silver, gold, tin, and other precious metals, all vital to supporting Carthage's military and mercantile activities. The Barcid family's control over Iberia not only provided Carthage with these resources, but also served as a springboard for future military campaigns. As Hamilcar set about consolidating Carthaginian control over the Iberian tribes, he was also laying the groundwork for a military resurgence. The legacy of Hamilcar's leadership in Iberia was passed on to his son, Hannibal Barca, who would become one of the most legendary military commanders in history. Hannibal's early life was marked by the shadow of Rome and his father's ambitions. As a child, Hannibal was brought to Rome's attention when he was taken as a hostage following Carthage's defeat in the First Punic War. It was during this time that Hannibal swore an oath of eternal enmity against Rome, an oath that would define his life's work. When Hamilcar died in 228 BCE, Hannibal was still a young man, but he was already a capable leader. He took command of the Carthaginian forces in Iberia and quickly made his mark by continuing his father's work. Hannibal's military campaigns in Iberia were marked by both diplomacy and conquest, as he forged alliances with certain Iberian tribes while crushing others that resisted Carthaginian authority. His victories not only secured Carthage's holdings in Iberia, but also brought many of the Iberian tribes into the Punic fold, providing Carthage with a formidable base of manpower and resources. It was Hannibal's remarkable ability to win the loyalty of the Iberian tribes, along with his deft command of his army, that made him stand out as a leader. He was not only a brilliant tactician on the battlefield, but also a shrewd politician who understood the importance of both military and diplomatic influence. His campaigns in Iberia bolstered his reputation, and soon Carthage's presence in the region was stronger than ever. The growing Carthaginian presence in Iberia did not go unnoticed by Rome. By now, Rome had already established itself as the dominant power on the Italian peninsula, and its imperial ambitions were expanding beyond its borders. While Rome had no immediate plans to engage Carthage directly in Iberia, it was aware of the threat posed by the expanding Punic influence. The Roman Senate began to see Carthage's resurgence as a challenge that could no longer be ignored. The seeds of the Second Punic War, 234 to 221 BCE, were sown in the ongoing struggles for dominance in Iberia. In 220 BCE, the city of Saguntum, an ally of Rome, was attacked by Hannibal in retaliation for their support of Roman interests. This siege marked the tipping point, as Rome viewed the attack on a Roman ally as a direct provocation. Despite the fact that Carthage had been drawn into a conflict over Iberian influence, the Romans saw it as an affront to their growing sphere of influence in the Western Mediterranean. For Carthage, the Roman response to the fall of Saguntum marked the beginning of a new phase in its long rivalry with Rome. Hannibal, ever the pragmatist, knew that war with Rome was now inevitable. The peace of the First Punic War had held for decades, but the tensions between the two powers, fueled by their competing ambitions for Mediterranean supremacy, had reached a breaking point. Hannibal, who had grown up with the aim of confronting Rome, was ready for the challenge. Unlike many of his predecessors who had relied primarily on Carthage's formidable navy, Hannibal would wage war on Roman soil, using his military genius and his command of a multinational army composed of Iberian, Numidian, and other allied troops. It was clear that Hannibal's vision extended beyond the immediate goals of Iberian expansion. He sought to challenge Rome directly and decisively. To achieve this, Hannibal embarked on one of the most ambitious military campaigns in history, the crossing of the Alps. In 217 BCE, Hannibal began his march toward Italy, leading an army of soldiers, cavalry, and war elephants. His goal was to strike directly at the heart of Rome, creating such terror and instability that the Romans would be forced to divert their attention and resources away from Carthage's Mediterranean empire. The audacity of Hannibal's plan was matched only by its execution. Despite tremendous logistical challenges, including harsh weather and difficult terrain, Hannibal's army crossed the Alps into Italy in one of the most remarkable military feats of antiquity. The Romans, initially caught off guard, quickly mobilized to meet the threat. Upon entering Italy, Hannibal scored a series of stunning victories, including the Battle of Trebia, the Battle of Lake Trasimene, and most famously, the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE. At Cannae, Hannibal executed one of the most brilliant tactical maneuvers in military history. By using a double envelopment strategy, he destroyed a much larger Roman army, killing an estimated 50,000 to 75,000 Roman soldiers in a single day. This victory shattered Roman morale and left much of Italy vulnerable to Hannibal's army. Despite these early successes, Hannibal faced significant challenges in maintaining his campaign in Italy. While his victories on the battlefield were decisive, he was unable to capture the city of Rome itself. Moreover, he was unable to gain the widespread support from Italian allies that he had hoped for. The Romans, though severely weakened, proved resilient. They adapted their tactics and implemented the Fabian strategy, named after the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus. Instead of engaging Hannibal in direct battle, the Romans employed a strategy of attrition, avoiding large-scale engagements while harassing Hannibal's forces and cutting off his supply lines. The Second Punic War, 218 to 190 BCE, marked a defining chapter in the ancient struggle between Rome and Carthage. For much of the conflict, the war appeared to favor Carthage, especially under the command of the brilliant general Hannibal Barca. Hannibal's early victories, particularly the decisive Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE, demonstrated his military genius and left Rome reeling. Yet, despite these setbacks, the Roman Republic managed not only to survive but eventually to recover, leading to one of the most remarkable comebacks in history. The initial Roman response to Hannibal's campaign was, understandably, one of shock and disarray. Cannae, in particular, was a devastating blow. The Roman legions, typically known for their discipline and ability to coordinate large-scale campaigns, were caught in a trap and nearly annihilated. The loss of so many experienced soldiers and commanders was a severe blow to Roman morale. Many Italian allies, who had previously pledged loyalty to Rome, began to waver in their support. The Carthaginian army, now stationed in Italy, seemed invincible. However, it was at this low point that Rome's resilience truly began to shine. The Roman Senate, recognizing that it could not afford to engage in open battle with Hannibal's forces directly, turned to the strategy of attrition. The Romans adopted a method of cautious, indirect warfare that would come to be known as the Flavian strategy. Named after the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus, this approach emphasized avoiding large-scale confrontations with Hannibal's army and instead focusing on harassing his supply lines, cutting off reinforcements, and limiting his ability to forage for food. Fabius Maximus's leadership marked a critical pivot in Roman military tactics. Rather than throwing fresh troops into battle after battle, the Romans preserved their strength and wore down the Carthaginian forces. This strategy allowed Rome to bide time, rebuild its army, and gain the initiative without suffering further catastrophic losses. Although initially unpopular with the Roman people, who were eager for a decisive confrontation, Fabian tactics proved successful in the long run. They gave Rome the breathing space needed to recover from the devastation of Cannae. At the same time, Rome was able to rally many of its Italian allies back to its cause. In the wake of Cannae, several cities that had defected to Carthage or were considering doing so were slowly brought back into the fold. Rome employed diplomatic efforts, offering clemency and assuring these cities that their autonomy would be respected if they supported the Republic. Some Italian cities, like Capua, initially embraced Hannibal, but soon realized the dangers of siding with Carthage and returned to Rome's side. The Carthaginians, meanwhile, found it increasingly difficult to capitalize on their victories. Hannibal's inability to capture Rome itself was a central issue. While he had won several key battles, the lack of support from other Italian cities and his inability to march directly on Rome meant that Carthage was ultimately unable to secure a decisive victory on Italian soil. Carthage's reliance on a mercenary army composed of various ethnic groups including Iberians, Numidians, and Gauls also created logistical challenges. While Hannibal's soldiers were skilled and dedicated, they lacked the cohesion and long-term loyalty of Rome's legions. Hannibal's difficulties were compounded by the fact that while he was an exceptional general, Carthage's command structure and resources in Italy were limited. The Carthaginian strategy had not been to conquer Rome outright, but to weaken the Republic by sowing discord among its allies and causing the Romans to overextend their forces. While this was a sound strategy at first, Hannibal's inability to decisively break the Roman spirit or capture Rome itself allowed the Roman Republic to adapt and rebuild. The turning point of the war came with the appointment of a new generation of Roman commanders. Chief among them, Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus. Scipio's leadership, combined with his innovative military tactics, would be crucial in turning the tide of the war in Rome's favor. Scipio's strategy was twofold: to strike at Carthage's holdings in Iberia and to bring the war to Carthage itself. By focusing on Iberia, Scipio cut off a vital source of Carthaginian manpower and resources. In 213 BCE, Scipio launched a campaign in Iberia that would eventually result in the capture of key Carthaginian cities. This success not only deprived Carthage of the rich resources of the Iberian Peninsula, but also removed Hannibal's reinforcements, which had been crucial to his campaign in Italy. In the meantime, Scipio's growing influence and military success began to make him a formidable rival to the Carthaginian leadership. He capitalized on Rome's newfound momentum and sought to shift the focus of the war from Italy to Carthage's homeland. By striking at Carthage's heart, Scipio hoped to force the Carthaginian government to call Hannibal back from Italy, thereby weakening his position and ultimately securing Roman victory. In 241 BCE, Scipio's strategic brilliance culminated in the Battle of Zama. The Battle of Zama, fought near the Carthaginian capital, was the decisive conflict that ended the Second Punic War. Scipio's forces, composed of well-trained Roman legions and allied troops, faced Hannibal's army, which had been weakened by years of campaigning and the loss of Iberian resources. Hannibal, despite his tactical genius, was unable to overcome the Roman army's discipline, cohesion, and innovative tactics. At Zama, Scipio employed a range of innovative strategies that countered Hannibal's famed war elephants and cavalry. One of the key elements of the battle was Scipio's use of his infantry in flexible formations, which allowed them to withstand Hannibal's cavalry charges. Additionally, Scipio took advantage of his alliance with Numidia, a region that supplied vital cavalry reinforcements to the Romans, thereby neutralizing Hannibal's numerical advantage. The battle was a decisive Roman victory. Hannibal was forced to retreat, and Carthage's hopes of victory evaporated. After Zama, Carthage was forced to sue for peace, and the terms of the peace settlement were devastating for the Punic Empire. Carthage was forced to pay a massive war indemnity, hand over its fleet, and agree to a range of restrictions on its military and foreign policy. Carthage's empire was effectively dismantled, and Rome emerged as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. The fall of Hannibal and the defeat of Carthage in the Second Punic War marked a watershed moment in the history of both Rome and Carthage. For Rome, the victory solidified its position as the preeminent power in the Mediterranean, setting the stage for its imperial expansion. For Carthage, the loss was catastrophic. Though the city survived, its power was severely diminished, and its military and political influence were relegated to a fraction of what they had been prior to the war. The end of the Second Punic War, 218 to 190 BCE, had left Carthage severely weakened, but the city was far from defeated. Despite the harsh terms of the peace settlement, which had stripped Carthage of its fleet, its colonies, and much of its military capability, the Carthaginians had managed to rebuild their economy and maintain a fragile existence. The city, though no longer a regional superpower, still retained wealth and a formidable commercial network, and many of its citizens were determined to restore Carthage to its former glory. However, Carthage's recovery and its perceived resurgence became a source of growing alarm for Rome. Over the years following the Second Punic War, Rome had firmly established itself as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. Yet, Carthage's recovery, combined with the frequent tensions between Rome and the African city-state, continued to raise concerns. Even though Carthage had strictly adhered to the terms of the peace treaty, Rome feared the potential for Carthaginian resurgence. This fear, compounded by political pressures and the ambitions of Roman leaders, ultimately led to the outbreak of the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE. The immediate cause of the war was the city of Numidia, a powerful kingdom to the west of Carthage. In the years following the Second Punic War, Numidia had grown increasingly hostile toward Carthage, with its king, Massinissa, eyeing Carthage's territory and resources. Rome, seeking to maintain its influence in the region, encouraged Numidia's encroachments. In response, Carthage sought to defend itself from the increasing threats posed by its neighbor, including military action against Numidian raiders. Rome, however, viewed any action taken by Carthage, no matter how defensive, as a violation of the peace terms set after the Second Punic War. Roman senators, including influential leaders such as Cato the Elder, began to call for the destruction of Carthage once and for all. Cato, in particular, was a vocal advocate for Carthage's annihilation, famously ending many of his speeches in the Senate with the phrase, "Carthage must be destroyed." At this point, Carthage was still a city-state with considerable wealth and influence in the Mediterranean, but its military capabilities were severely limited by the terms of the peace settlement. Carthage had been forbidden from maintaining a standing army or a powerful navy, which meant that it could not defend itself in the way it had during its glory days. Despite this, Carthage's leaders attempted to diplomatically resolve the growing tensions, seeking to avoid war by offering significant concessions to Rome. However, Rome's demands continued to escalate. The Senate, emboldened by the continued distrust of Carthage's ambitions, called for the city's total dismantling. In response, Carthage, desperate to avoid further conflict, agreed to the Roman terms, which included disarming its military, dismantling its walls, and even relocating its population. The Senate, however, was unsatisfied with these measures and refused to believe Carthage's genuine intent to comply with the treaty. By 149 BCE, the Senate had made the fateful decision to launch a war of complete destruction against Carthage. The Roman general Scipio Aemilianus, grandson of the famous Scipio Africanus, was appointed to lead the final campaign. The Roman forces gathered at the port city of Utica, just outside Carthage, and began preparations for a siege. Carthage, though weakened, was not without defenders. The city's leaders, including the commander Hasdrubal, chose to resist the Roman invasion rather than submit once again. The walls of Carthage, though old, were still formidable, and the city's citizens rallied together in a last-ditch effort to defend their homes and their way of life. Carthage's military forces, composed of both professional soldiers and volunteers from across the empire, fought valiantly against the Roman siege. However, despite their determination, the Carthaginians were unable to withstand the sheer power of Rome's military forces. The siege itself was long and grueling. The Romans, under Scipio Aemilianus, began to encircle Carthage, cutting off the city from the outside world. They constructed siege walls and used advanced techniques, including siege towers, battering rams, and catapults, to break through the Carthaginian defenses. Despite the Carthaginians' best efforts, the Romans steadily advanced. The city's defenders, who had initially hoped for reinforcements from other African powers, saw their hopes dashed as Rome consolidated its control over the surrounding region. As the siege wore on, the situation within Carthage grew increasingly desperate. Supplies dwindled, and famine began to take hold. Despite the dire circumstances, the Carthaginians held their ground, led by a determined but increasingly exhausted population. The turning point came in 146 BCE when the Romans finally breached Carthage's outer walls. After weeks of bitter fighting, the Roman forces entered the city. What followed was a brutal and systematic assault. The Carthaginians fought fiercely, but the Roman legions overwhelmed them, and the city was soon in flames. The destruction of Carthage was total. The city's inhabitants were either killed in the fighting or sold into slavery. According to ancient accounts, the Romans, after destroying the city, plowed the ground with salt to ensure that nothing would grow there again, although this detail is likely an exaggeration or later embellishment. Regardless of the specific nature of the final destruction, Carthage ceased to exist as a political entity. Rome, now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean, emerged victorious. The city of Carthage was obliterated, and its territories were absorbed into the Roman Republic. The Third Punic War, which had begun as a result of Rome's desire to eliminate Carthage once and for all, was thus concluded with the complete annihilation of its rival. The destruction of Carthage was not only a military victory for Rome, but also a powerful political statement. Rome demonstrated to its enemies and allies alike that no power could rival its ambitions without facing dire consequences. The fall of Carthage marked the end of an era in Mediterranean history and the beginning of Rome's rise to unchallenged dominance. The complete destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Mediterranean world. With the fall of its most formidable rival, Rome emerged as the undisputed hegemon of the Western Mediterranean. Carthage, once the center of a thriving empire, had been reduced to ruins, and its lands were now incorporated into the growing Roman Republic. However, the consequences of Rome's dominance went far beyond the mere annexation of territory. The end of Carthage reshaped the political, social, and cultural landscape of the Mediterranean, setting the stage for Rome's transformation into an imperial superpower. The power vacuum left by Carthage's destruction was swiftly filled by Rome. With no major rival in the Western Mediterranean, Rome could now consolidate control over vast swathes of territory stretching from Hispania, modern-day Spain, to North Africa, Sicily, and even the islands of the Western Mediterranean. The territories formerly held by Carthage were either absorbed directly into Roman provinces or used to secure new allies who would help maintain Roman authority in the region. The complete annexation of Carthage's African holdings allowed Rome to establish a crucial foothold in North Africa, an area that would become increasingly important in the centuries to come. The elimination of Carthage removed the last major challenge to Rome's supremacy in the Western Mediterranean. Rome, which had already begun expanding into the Eastern Mediterranean, now turned its attention toward the Greek world and the Hellenistic kingdoms of Asia Minor, the Near East, and Egypt. With its influence unchallenged in the West, Rome's gaze naturally shifted eastward. The Roman Republic would soon find itself in direct competition with the remnants of the Hellenistic world, particularly with the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, and the Macedonian kingdoms. In the immediate aftermath of Carthage's destruction, Rome faced a series of challenges, both external and internal, as it struggled to transition from a republic to an empire. The wealth gained from Carthage and its territories played a key role in this transformation. The annexation of Carthaginian lands brought Rome unprecedented resources, especially in the form of agricultural land, precious metals, and the slave labor necessary to fuel Rome's growing economy. These resources also allowed Rome to maintain a large standing army, which would become the backbone of its expansionist ambitions. Rome's new territories in North Africa and Hispania were crucial for ensuring the continued flow of these resources. Carthage had once controlled the key trade routes in the Western Mediterranean, and now Rome inherited that network. Roman merchants were able to tap into the lucrative trade between Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Carthaginian cities like Utica became Roman settlements, while Roman governors imposed Roman law and Roman culture on the region. In North Africa, Rome established the province of Africa, which would become one of the richest and most productive provinces in the empire. The annexation of Carthage's former territories also sparked tensions with neighboring powers, particularly the Kingdom of Numidia. Massinissa, the king of Numidia, had been an ally of Rome during the Second Punic War, and his kingdom had expanded significantly after Carthage's fall. As Rome solidified its control over the Western Mediterranean, it had to navigate the delicate political situation in Numidia, which sought greater autonomy and influence in the region. The relationship between Rome and Numidia was complex, at times cooperative and at times contentious, but Rome ultimately ensured that Numidia did not pose a serious threat to its dominance. Rome's expansionist policies were not limited to the West. In the Eastern Mediterranean, Rome's growing power caught the attention of the Greek city-states, as well as the larger Hellenistic kingdoms. The Greek cities of Asia Minor, particularly those along the coast, had long been under the influence of the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Kingdom. However, as Rome's power grew, so too did its ambitions in the east. In the wake of Carthage's destruction, Rome began to exert its influence over the Greek world, starting with its involvement in the First and Second Macedonian Wars, 285 BCE, 191 BCE. Rome's primary concern was the rising power of Macedonia, a kingdom that had once dominated Greece but was now under the rule of King Philip V. Rome's intervention in the Greek world was framed as a response to Macedonian aggression, but it also served Rome's larger strategic interests in controlling the Eastern Mediterranean. The First Macedonian War, fought between Rome and Macedonia, ended in a Roman victory, and Rome began to take a more active role in the politics of Greece. The Second Macedonian War, 117 to 191 BCE, saw further Roman intervention, ultimately leading to the defeat of King Philip V and the weakening of Macedonian power. In the aftermath, Rome began to assert its influence over the Greek city-states, and by the middle of the 2nd century BCE, it had effectively become the dominant power in Greece. Rome's influence in Greece was formalized in 148 BCE with the conquest of the Macedonian kingdom. Following the Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE, Rome broke the Macedonian kingdom into smaller, more easily controllable states. This marked the end of Macedonian power in Greece and the beginning of Roman hegemony in the region. The Greek world, once a cradle of philosophy, culture, and political autonomy, was now under the control of the Roman Republic. Roman expansion into Greece and Macedonia was followed by a series of wars in the eastern Mediterranean. Rome's involvement in Asia Minor, particularly with the Seleucid Empire and the Kingdom of Pergamon, further solidified its position as the new power in the east. In 132 BCE, Rome began its conquest of Asia Minor with the annexation of the Kingdom of Pergamon. This was followed by further expansion into the Hellenistic territories of Syria, Egypt, and Asia Minor as Rome sought to control the vital trade routes between Europe, Asia, and Africa. However, as Rome's influence spread across the Mediterranean, the pressures of empire began to mount. The rapid expansion and the accumulation of wealth from conquered territories brought about significant social, economic, and political changes within the Roman Republic. The influx of slaves from conquered territories undermined the Roman economy, exacerbating inequality and leading to growing dissatisfaction among the lower classes. The vast wealth accumulated by Rome also led to increasing corruption and political instability. Powerful generals such as Gaius Marius, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, and later Julius Caesar began to assert their power and influence, leading to a series of internal conflicts that would eventually transform the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE and the subsequent consolidation of Rome's power over the Mediterranean set the stage for a fundamental transformation in Roman governance. The period of the Roman Republic, which had been marked by a system of checks and balances, representative democracy, and the involvement of multiple elite families in decision-making, was gradually coming to an end. In its place, a new and more centralized system of government, one that would eventually give rise to the Roman Empire, was beginning to take shape. This transformation was not immediate, nor was it inevitable. It resulted from a series of social, political, and military upheavals that undermined the stability of the Republic and allowed for the rise of individual political and military figures who were able to seize power. The vast territorial expansion Rome had undertaken in the wake of the Punic Wars exposed the weaknesses in the Republic's political structure. With an empire that spanned much of the Mediterranean, Rome had to govern a vast and increasingly diverse population. The Senate, while still the core governing body, was dominated by a small group of aristocratic families whose interests often conflicted with those of the common people, or plebeians. Meanwhile, the consuls, who were elected annually and were meant to serve as the highest officials in Rome, often lacked the authority to address the pressing issues facing the Republic, such as the integration of newly acquired territories, the growing wealth disparity, and the demands of an increasingly militarized society. This period of Roman history saw the rise of the populares and the optimates, two political factions that represented the competing interests of different groups within Roman society. The optimates, largely composed of the senatorial elite, sought to maintain the traditional structures of Roman government, which gave them substantial control over political decisions. The populares, on the other hand, represented the interests of the lower classes, and their leaders sought to challenge the power of the Senate and give more political power to the plebeians. These divisions led to significant political instability, with both factions vying for control and influence in the Republic. The first signs of the Republic's decline were seen in the Gracchi brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, who attempted to implement a series of land reforms aimed at addressing the growing inequality between the rich and the poor. In the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome's wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few elite families, while many Roman citizens, particularly soldiers who had fought in the wars of expansion, found themselves without land and livelihood. The Gracchi sought to redistribute public land to the poor, a move that was opposed by the Senate and the powerful landowners. Tiberius Gracchus was assassinated in 132 BCE, and his brother Gaius was killed in a violent political conflict just a few years later. While their reforms ultimately failed, the Gracchi brothers' efforts symbolized the increasing rift between the political classes in Rome and foreshadowed the more radical shifts in Roman politics that were to come. The Gracchi crisis also revealed the deepening political polarization in Rome. After the death of the Gracchi, Rome's politics became increasingly violent, with rival factions turning to force to achieve their aims. This shift was particularly evident in the rise of the general Gaius Marius. Marius, who had made his name in military service, broke with Roman tradition by allowing the capite censi, the landless poor, to join the army. This reform fundamentally changed the Roman military system, as soldiers became more loyal to their generals than to the state, marking the beginning of the client army system that would dominate Roman politics for centuries to come. Gaius Marius's reforms, combined with the Republic's increasing reliance on military power, paved the way for the rise of powerful generals who would eventually eclipse the authority of the Senate. In particular, Marius's military reforms created a new class of soldiers who were more loyal to their commanders than to the Republic itself. As Rome expanded its territory and fought more wars, generals like Marius and his successors began to build personal armies, leading to a situation where the loyalty of the military was often determined by the leadership of individual commanders rather than the state. Marius's career was also marked by his rivalry with Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a general who would become one of the most significant figures in the final years of the Republic. Sulla's rise to power was partly a result of his military successes in the East, particularly his victory over the king of Pontus, Mithridates VI, during the First Mithridatic War. Sulla's political ambitions, however, led him to challenge Marius for control of Rome. In a shocking and unprecedented move, Sulla marched his army on Rome in 188 BCE, a bold act that violated the Republic's tradition of not allowing armed forces within the city. After a bloody civil war, Sulla emerged victorious and became the dictator of Rome. Sulla's dictatorship represented a turning point in Roman history. During his time in power, he implemented a series of constitutional reforms designed to strengthen the authority of the Senate and limit the power of the popular assemblies. Sulla's reforms, though initially aimed at restoring the authority of the Senate, ultimately failed to prevent the further decline of the Republic. In fact, Sulla's actions set a dangerous precedent, as they demonstrated that military force could be used to achieve political ends, opening the door for future generals to use their armies for personal gain. After Sulla's retirement in 135 BCE, the political instability of the late Republic continued. The power of the Senate continued to wane, while the power of individual generals grew. The political system became increasingly dominated by wealthy generals who relied on their personal armies and political alliances to gain power. One of the most prominent of these generals was Pompey the Great. Pompey, originally a supporter of Sulla, rose to prominence through his military victories in the East, particularly his campaigns against the pirates of the Mediterranean and his victories in the Third Mithridatic War. By the 60s BCE, Pompey had amassed significant political and military power and was able to form the first triumvirate with Julius Caesar and Crassus, two of Rome's most powerful men. The first triumvirate was an informal political alliance that allowed the three men to dominate Roman politics. However, this alliance was unstable, and tensions between Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus ultimately led to a series of conflicts that would lead to the fall of the Republic. The end of the Roman Republic was marked by the dramatic transition from a political system rooted in a complex set of traditions, balances, and tensions to the centralized rule of the Roman Empire. The man at the heart of this transformation was Augustus, born Gaius Octavius Thoroughness in 63 BCE. His path to power was marked by a series of political, military, and diplomatic maneuvers that would reshape the entire Mediterranean world. Augustus's rise to supremacy was not a simple or immediate process, but it culminated in the establishment of a new political order that would last for centuries. The death of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE had left Rome in chaos. Though Caesar's assassination was meant to restore the traditional republic, it instead opened the door to more conflict and instability. Rome was plunged into a series of civil wars as various factions, led by individuals with varying levels of ambition and support, fought for control of the state. Among these figures was Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, known to history as Augustus, who would eventually emerge as the supreme leader of Rome. At the time of Julius Caesar's death, Octavian was a young man, only 19 years old. He was named Caesar's adopted son and heir, a testament to the deep trust Caesar had placed in him. Octavian's relationship with his adoptive father was critical in propelling him to the forefront of Roman politics. However, Caesar's assassination had left a power vacuum, and Octavian was not the only one vying for control. In the immediate aftermath of Caesar's death, Rome's politics were dominated by two other key figures: Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, a member of the Roman elite. These three men formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE, a political alliance that officially divided control of Rome's territories among them. The Second Triumvirate was initially a formidable force, and it allowed Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus to defeat their political opponents, including those who had been involved in Caesar's assassination. In 42 BCE, the triumvirs decisively defeated the forces of Brutus and Cassius, the leading conspirators behind Caesar's death, at the Battle of Philippi. This victory solidified their power, but the triumvirate was fraught with internal tensions. Lepidus was gradually sidelined, leaving Octavian and Antony as the dominant figures. Antony and Octavian's relationship, initially marked by cooperation, soon deteriorated. Antony's military campaigns in the East, particularly in Egypt, where he allied with Cleopatra VII, the Queen of Egypt, raised suspicions in Rome. Antony's lavish lifestyle and his relationship with Cleopatra were perceived by many Romans as a threat to the Roman state, especially as he seemed to be establishing a power base outside of Italy. The Roman Senate, which had once been willing to accept Antony's power, began to align itself more closely with Octavian, who skillfully portrayed Antony as a traitor to Roman values. The rivalry between Octavian and Antony reached its peak in 32 BCE, when Octavian used Antony's perceived betrayal as a rallying cry for war. The two leaders met in battle at the famous Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, a naval engagement that would determine the future of Rome. Octavian's forces, commanded by his admiral Agrippa, decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. Antony and Cleopatra both committed suicide in the aftermath of the battle, leaving Octavian as the uncontested master of Rome. With the defeat of Antony, Octavian stood as the sole ruler of the Roman world. His victory at Actium marked the end of the Roman Republic's traditional political structure and the beginning of the Roman Empire. In the aftermath of his victory, Octavian took a series of steps to solidify his control and to consolidate power under his leadership. His ability to present himself as a defender of Roman traditions, while subtly consolidating autocratic power, was key to his success. In 27 BCE, Octavian took the title Princeps, meaning first citizen, a title that reflected his position as the leading man in Roman politics without invoking the unpopular term king or dictator. He was careful to maintain the illusion of the republic's political system, ensuring that the Senate and other traditional republican institutions still existed, but in reality, he held supreme authority. The Senate, while still formally powerful, had been reduced to a secondary role. Octavian's power was largely derived from his control over the military and his manipulation of public opinion. Octavian's consolidation of power was aided by his ability to secure the loyalty of the Roman legions, which were the key to maintaining control over the vast empire. By ensuring that the military remained loyal to him personally, he was able to establish a regime that would outlast his death. Additionally, Octavian's careful manipulation of the Roman people, through generous distributions of grain, land, and entertainment, helped secure popular support. The reforms he implemented during his reign, including the establishment of a standing army, a professional bureaucracy, and a centralized system of governance, allowed Rome to function as a unified empire for the first time. The formalization of Octavian's rule took place in 27 BCE, when he was given the title Augustus by the Senate, a title that carried religious connotations and linked him to the gods. The name Augustus, meaning revered or majestic, reflected the new image that Octavian sought to cultivate as a divinely sanctioned leader. The Senate bestowed upon him extraordinary powers, including control over military forces, the ability to appoint governors, and the authority to pass laws. Augustus was also granted the power to control the provinces, the vast territories outside of Italy, where the majority of Rome's wealth and military resources were concentrated. Under Augustus's rule, Rome experienced a period of relative stability and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. This era, which lasted for more than 2 centuries, was marked by a flourishing of trade, culture, and infrastructure. Augustus undertook a series of monumental building projects, including the construction of new roads, bridges, temples, and aqueducts, which helped to solidify Roman control over its empire. The vast network of Roman roads allowed for easier communication, transportation, and the movement of troops, further strengthening Augustus's grip on the empire. One of Augustus's most lasting legacies was his ability to stabilize the Roman political system and to institute a form of government that balanced central authority with respect for Roman traditions. He avoided the appearance of tyranny, instead cultivating the image of a modest and pious ruler who respected the Senate and the people. Augustus ruled with the support of the Senate and the military, but it was his ability to consolidate power while maintaining the illusion of the old republic that allowed him to usher in a new era of Roman rule. The reign of Augustus, 31 BCE, 14 CE, marked a decisive shift in Roman governance and society, transitioning from the frailties of a republic riven by internal conflict to the stability of the Roman Empire. As the first emperor of Rome, Augustus, originally named Gaius Octavius Thoroughness, faced the monumental task of rebuilding a state that had been battered by civil war and political fragmentation. Augustus's success lay in his ability to consolidate power, stabilize the empire, and institute a system that balanced central authority with the preservation of traditional Roman values. One of Augustus's primary achievements was the creation of a new political order that maintained the appearance of republican government while consolidating imperial authority in his hands. After his victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Augustus faced the delicate challenge of making himself Rome's dominant ruler without provoking a backlash from those who still cherished the ideals of the Republic. In 27 BCE, Augustus offered to resign his powers, but the Senate, eager for stability, instead formally granted him supreme authority, marking the beginning of the Roman Empire. Augustus accepted the titles of princeps, first citizen, and imperator, commander, positioning himself as a leader who worked within the framework of traditional Roman institutions. By taking these titles, Augustus was able to present himself as a restorer of the Republic, even though the political system had shifted under his rule. Augustus's subtle approach to power allowed him to avoid the overt authoritarianism of a traditional monarchy while still consolidating control over the military, finances, and foreign policy. One of the most important aspects of Augustus's reign was his establishment of the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, a period of relative stability that lasted for over 2 centuries. This peace was the result of several key reforms that Augustus instituted during his time as emperor. Perhaps the most significant was the reform of the Roman military. Before Augustus's reign, the Roman military system was based on a citizen militia, where soldiers were primarily volunteers who served for a limited period of time. This system had worked well in earlier centuries, but as the Roman Empire expanded and warfare became more complex, it became increasingly difficult for the state to rely on short-term soldiers. Augustus recognized that the military needed to be professionalized to ensure the stability of the empire. One of Augustus's first reforms was to establish a permanent standing army that was paid regularly and had fixed terms of service. This shift allowed for a more disciplined and reliable military force that could maintain order, defend the borders, and expand Roman territory. Soldiers in the Imperial army were given land or cash upon retirement, creating a powerful incentive for loyalty and service. These reforms helped to stabilize the Roman military, ensuring that the empire's borders remained secure and that the emperor's authority was unquestioned. In addition to these reforms, Augustus created the Praetorian Guard, an elite group of soldiers tasked with protecting the emperor. The Praetorian Guard became one of the most important military institutions in Rome, serving as the personal bodyguard of the emperor and playing a significant role in Roman politics. Over time, the Praetorian Guard's influence would grow, and they would have a significant impact on the succession of emperors. Another key area of Augustus's reforms was the restructuring of the Roman government's administrative and financial systems. One of his primary goals was to create a more efficient bureaucracy that could manage the vast empire's growing needs. Augustus divided the empire into provinces, each governed by either a proconsul, a former consul, or a legate, a senior military officer. This system allowed for more direct control over the provinces, which were vital to the empire's wealth and stability. Augustus also introduced financial reforms that helped stabilize the Roman economy. He reformed the tax system, standardizing taxes and creating a more efficient collection process. He established a census to track population numbers, which allowed for more accurate taxation and resource distribution. These reforms helped to ensure that Rome's revenues were stable, which in turn allowed Augustus to fund public works, the military, and the administration. Augustus also oversaw the creation of a state-run grain supply system. The annona was responsible for importing grain from Egypt and other provinces to feed the growing population of Rome. This system not only ensured that the people of Rome had a steady food supply, but also helped to secure the loyalty of the Roman populace. Augustus understood that a stable food supply was essential for the survival of the empire and for maintaining public order. While Augustus focused on the military and administrative structures, he also placed significant emphasis on moral and social reforms. Augustus believed that the decline of traditional Roman values was one of the reasons for the fall of the Republic. In an effort to restore moral integrity to Roman society, he introduced a series of laws aimed at encouraging marriage, procreation, and traditional Roman virtues such as modesty, piety, and respect for the family. The Lex Julia de Maritandis Ordinibus, passed in 26 BCE, was one of Augustus's most famous moral reforms. This law encouraged marriage among the upper classes and penalized those who remained unmarried or childless. Augustus also passed laws that restricted adultery, seeking to curb the moral decay he saw in Roman society. He believed that the strength of the state depended on the strength of its families, and by encouraging traditional family values, he hoped to ensure the stability of the empire. In addition to his moral legislation, Augustus was also a patron of the arts and literature. He understood the power of cultural production to shape public opinion and strengthen the identity of the Roman state. Under his reign, Rome experienced a cultural flourishing known as the Golden Age of Latin literature. Writers such as Virgil, Horace, and Ovid produced works that celebrated Rome's imperial achievements and the virtues of Roman society. Virgil's Aeneid, for example, was not only a literary masterpiece, but also a work that reinforced the idea of Rome's divine destiny and its role in the larger world. One of the most visible aspects of Augustus's reign was the extensive building program that transformed the city of Rome and the provinces. Augustus famously boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. His building projects included the construction of temples, roads, aqueducts, and public buildings that enhanced the grandeur of Rome and helped improve the infrastructure of the empire. The construction of new roads was particularly important, as it facilitated the movement of troops, goods, and information across the empire. The Roman road network became the backbone of the empire, allowing Rome to maintain control over its far-flung territories. Augustus also commissioned the construction of aqueducts to bring fresh water into the city, ensuring the health and well-being of its population. Augustus's building projects were not limited to Rome itself. In the provinces, he established a system of colonies that helped to spread Roman culture and consolidate Roman control. These colonies, many of which were established in the provinces of Gaul, Hispania, and North Africa, became centers of Roman civilization and played a key role in integrating the diverse peoples of the empire. Augustus was also a shrewd political leader who understood the importance of religion in Roman life. He worked to strengthen the role of religion in public life and to align the Roman state with divine favor. Augustus was careful to cultivate his image as a religious leader, and he promoted the worship of traditional Roman gods. He restored temples to Jupiter, Apollo, and other deities, and took part in public rituals that reinforced the connection between the emperor and the divine. Perhaps the most important religious innovation of Augustus's reign was the establishment of the imperial cult, which elevated the emperor to a divine status. Augustus was not declared a god during his lifetime, but after his death, he was officially deified, and the cult of Augustus spread throughout the empire. This new religious institution helped to legitimize imperial power and establish the idea that the emperor was divinely ordained to rule. Augustus's reign brought stability, prosperity, and a sense of unity to Rome after decades of internal conflict. His reforms laid the foundation for the Roman Empire, and his careful management of power ensured that the empire would outlive him. Augustus ruled until his death in 14 CE, at the age of 75. His reign marked the end of a long period of civil war and the beginning of a new era in Roman history. Following the death of Augustus in the year 14 CE, the Roman Empire entered a new phase of its history. Augustus had left behind a carefully structured political system that allowed for the smooth transfer of power, but his death also raised questions about the stability of the empire. The transition from Augustus to his successor, Tiberius, marked the beginning of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which would rule Rome for nearly a century. This dynasty included some of Rome's most iconic emperors, from Tiberius to Nero, and its reign profoundly impacted the empire's trajectory, with both periods of prosperity and times of turmoil. The Julio-Claudian dynasty is named after two powerful families, the Julians, to which Augustus belonged, and the Claudians, which produced emperors such as Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. The early years of the empire were marked by the consolidation of imperial power, but also by the growing tensions between the emperor, the Senate, and the Roman people. Tiberius, the stepson and adopted son of Augustus, became emperor after Augustus's death. His ascension to the throne was smooth in terms of formalities. He was widely recognized as the rightful heir due to Augustus's adoption and designation of Tiberius as his successor. However, Tiberius's reign was far from straightforward. While Augustus had managed to maintain the appearance of a republican system, Tiberius's rule highlighted some of the challenges of imperial governance. Initially, Tiberius was a capable and competent ruler, consolidating the gains of Augustus and strengthening the imperial structure. However, his later years were marked by increasing isolation, paranoia, and distrust of those around him. Tiberius withdrew from Rome for several years to the island of Capri, where he ruled remotely, leaving the administration of the empire to his subordinates, including the notorious Sejanus, the commander of the Praetorian Guard. The distance between Tiberius and Rome fueled speculation and rumors, especially regarding his relationship with Sejanus and his role in various political purges. As a result, Tiberius's reign became increasingly despotic in the eyes of many, with accusations of treachery, corruption, and brutal suppression of dissent. His reign was also marked by increasing authoritarianism, as Tiberius took full control of the military and exercised direct control over the provinces. Tiberius's death in the year 37 CE marked the end of a tumultuous period. While his reign had been marked by suspicion and intrigue, Tiberius had laid the foundations for his successor's reign and ensured that the imperial system would endure. Caligula, born Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, was Tiberius's grandnephew and successor. His reign, from 37 CE to 41 CE, is one of the most infamous in Roman history. At first, Caligula was welcomed as a liberator after the death of Tiberius, and many Romans hoped that he would return the government to its more traditional republican roots. However, Caligula's early popularity quickly gave way to erratic behavior, extravagance, and cruelty. Caligula's reign is often remembered for his eccentricities, such as his rumored declaration that he was a living god, his alleged plan to appoint his horse as consul, and his lavish spending on public entertainments. While some of these accounts may have been exaggerated or invented by later historians, it is clear that Caligula's behavior became increasingly erratic as his reign progressed. His policies alienated the Senate and the Roman elite, who saw his actions as both humiliating and threatening to the established order. Caligula's reign ended abruptly when he was assassinated in 41 CE by members of the Praetorian Guard who had grown tired of his rule. While Caligula's death was seen as a necessary act by some, it also left the empire in a state of uncertainty. His reign, marked by excess and violence, had left an indelible mark on the collective memory of Rome, and it highlighted the dangers of absolute power in the hands of an individual who was both incompetent and unpredictable. After Caligula's assassination, the throne passed to his uncle Claudius, who had been largely sidelined during the reign of Augustus and Tiberius. Claudius was considered an unlikely candidate for emperor due to his physical disabilities and perceived lack of political acumen. However, his rule turned out to be far more competent and effective than many had anticipated. Claudius's reign, which lasted from 41 CE to 54 CE, is often seen as a period of relative stability for the Roman Empire. Claudius's first major achievement was the conquest of Britain in 43 CE, which marked the first Roman invasion of the island. The conquest of Britain added a significant new province to the empire and helped to cement Claudius's reputation as a capable ruler. In addition to his military success, Claudius implemented a series of administrative reforms that helped to improve the functioning of the Roman government. Claudius's reign also saw significant developments in the legal system. He was responsible for a major overhaul of the courts, and he sought to make the legal system more equitable and accessible to the common people. Claudius was also known for his support of the plebeians, particularly through the expansion of public works, the distribution of grain, and the improvement of infrastructure. Despite his successes, Claudius's reign was not without challenges. His relationship with his wives was tumultuous, and his eventual marriage to Agrippina the Younger led to a series of political intrigues. Agrippina, who was the mother of the future emperor Nero, is often blamed for poisoning Claudius in 54 CE, thereby ensuring her son's ascension to the throne. Nero, born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, became emperor in 54 CE after the death of his adoptive father, Claudius. Initially, Nero's rule seemed promising. He was young, charismatic, and popular with the Roman people. He was initially guided by his mother, Agrippina, and his advisors, such as the philosopher Seneca. But as he grew older, Nero's reign took a darker turn. Nero's early years were marked by reforms and efforts to present himself as a benevolent ruler. He implemented policies that benefited the lower classes, including the reduction of taxes and the promotion of public works. However, as Nero grew more independent, his rule became characterized by excess, cruelty, and paranoia. He famously ordered the execution of his mother, Agrippina, in a power struggle that would prove to be one of the most notorious acts of his reign. He also had his wife, Octavia, executed and married his mistress, Poppaea Sabina. Nero's reign was marked by scandals, mismanagement, and a growing sense of discontent among the Roman elites. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE further damaged his reputation as rumors spread that Nero had either started the fire or had done nothing to stop it. In response, he blamed the Christians, leading to widespread persecution. While Nero was a patron of the arts and had a flair for public performances, his extravagant lifestyle and erratic behavior alienated many Romans. In the year 68 CE, as revolts and conspiracies spread across the empire, Nero was declared a public enemy by the Senate. Facing imminent overthrow, he committed suicide at the age of 30. His death marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. After Nero's death, Rome was plunged into a period of instability known as the Year of the Four Emperors, during which 4 different men vied for control of the empire. the Julio-Claudian dynasty left a profound impact on the history of Rome. Augustus's reign established the foundations of imperial rule, and his successors, despite their personal flaws and shortcomings, contributed to the consolidation of the Roman Empire. Under Augustus, Rome experienced a period of relative peace and prosperity, and many of the key structures of Roman governance were established. However, the reigns of Caligula, Claudius, and Nero demonstrated the dangers of absolute power in the hands of an individual, particularly when those individuals were erratic or lacked the wisdom to govern effectively. The death of Nero in the year 68 CE marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and set the stage for a period of turmoil in the Roman Empire, famously known as the Year of the Four Emperors. In this year, 4 different men, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, would rise to power in rapid succession, each attempting to stabilize the empire after Nero's chaotic reign. However, it was Vespasian, the commander who had played a key role in suppressing the Jewish revolt in Judea, who ultimately emerged victorious and founded the Flavian dynasty. His reign, beginning in the year 69 CE, would usher in a period of relative stability and reform that helped restore Rome's power and infrastructure, healing the wounds inflicted during the previous tumultuous decades. The Flavian dynasty, named after Vespasian's family, marked a turning point in Roman history. It not only stabilized the empire after the decline of the Julio-Claudian family, but also ushered in a new phase of imperial governance. Vespasian and his sons, Titus and Domitian, would lay the groundwork for many of the enduring features of Roman rule, including the strengthening of the imperial bureaucracy, the expansion of public works, and the centralization of imperial authority. Vespasian's ascension to the throne came after the death of Nero, during a period when the Roman Empire was deeply fractured. The Year of the Four Emperors was a direct consequence of the lack of a clear succession after Nero's death. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius each claimed the imperial throne, but none could establish long-term legitimacy or stability. Vespasian, who had been serving as a general in the eastern provinces during the civil conflict, was initially outside the political chaos in Rome. His solid military background and ability to secure the loyalty of the legions ultimately gave him the upper hand. Vespasian's rise was aided by the support of the Roman legions, particularly those in the provinces. The military was a critical factor in determining who could hold the imperial power, and Vespasian proved adept at consolidating military support. Upon his victory, he returned to Rome and worked to restore order, reduce corruption, and rebuild the imperial infrastructure. His pragmatic leadership style and focus on fiscal responsibility marked the beginning of a new era of stability after the mismanagement of Nero's reign. One of Vespasian's most significant accomplishments was his financial reforms. The empire had been strained by Nero's extravagant spending, including his lavish building projects and military campaigns. Vespasian introduced taxes on a range of goods, including the sale of public offices, and reformed the tax collection system to ensure that Rome's finances were in order. He also focused on making sure that the empire's provinces paid their share, which helped to distribute the financial burden more equitably. Vespasian's fiscal reforms restored Rome's treasury and allowed the empire to fund critical public works. Vespasian was also known for his public works projects. One of the most iconic projects of his reign was the construction of the Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater, which became a symbol of Rome's grandeur. This monumental structure was funded partly by the spoils taken from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem after Vespasian's son Titus had successfully suppressed the Jewish revolt in Judea. The Colosseum was not only a symbol of Roman engineering and architectural prowess, but also a tool for securing the emperor's popularity, as it provided the Roman people with new forms of entertainment, such as gladiatorial games and public spectacles. Vespasian's reign was characterized by his ability to balance power with respect for Roman traditions. He presented himself as a restorer of Roman values, focusing on strengthening the empire while maintaining the facade of republican institutions. Vespasian's restoration of stability after the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors helped to solidify the foundation for his successors and the future of the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian's son, Titus, succeeded him in the year 79 CE. Unlike his father, Titus's reign was short, lasting only 2 years, but it was marked by both triumph and tragedy. Titus had served as a general during the Jewish War, leading Roman forces to victory in Jerusalem and famously destroying the Second Temple. His victory was celebrated with a grand triumph in Rome, and the spoils from the conquest were used to fund monumental construction projects such as the completion of the Colosseum. Titus's leadership during the Jewish War cemented his reputation as a military hero and helped to enhance his popularity. However, Titus's reign was also marked by several significant challenges, most notably the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. The eruption destroyed the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, burying them under a thick layer of ash. Titus took immediate action to provide relief to the victims, organizing rescue efforts and sending financial aid to the affected regions. His response to the disaster demonstrated his compassion and dedication to his people, but the scale of the tragedy cast a shadow over his reign. Titus's reign was also marked by a devastating fire that broke out in Rome in the year 80 CE. This fire destroyed a significant portion of the city, further compounding the challenges that Titus faced as emperor. Despite these setbacks, Titus worked to rebuild the city and restore its infrastructure. His efforts to restore order and provide for the welfare of the Roman people won him the admiration of many, and he was remembered as a just and caring ruler. Titus's reign ended prematurely in 81 CE when he died unexpectedly, likely due to a fever. His death was mourned by the Roman people, and he was deified after his passing. Titus's untimely death left the empire to be succeeded by his younger brother Domitian, who would inherit the challenges of ruling a vast empire. Domitian, the younger brother of Titus, became emperor in 81 CE. Unlike his father and older brother, Domitian's reign is remembered for its authoritarian style and increasing centralization of power. Domitian ruled with an iron fist, concentrating power in his hands and eliminating political opponents. His reign was marked by both extensive public works and a growing sense of paranoia and cruelty. One of Domitian's significant achievements was his commitment to the military and the security of the empire. He strengthened the Roman border defenses, particularly along the Rhine and Danube rivers, ensuring that the empire's northern frontiers were secure. Domitian's military reforms were crucial in maintaining the Roman Empire's vast territory, especially during a time when external threats from tribes such as the Germanic and Dacian peoples were growing more pressing. However, Domitian's reign was also marked by his increasing authoritarianism. He took on the title of Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, which reflected his growing desire for absolute power. He ruled as a dictator, bypassing the traditional checks and balances of the Senate and centralizing all political authority in the emperor's hands. Domitian also launched a series of purges, executing those whom he saw as threats to his rule, including many members of the aristocracy. His autocratic style alienated many senators and elites, leading to growing opposition. Domitian's reign ended in a conspiracy that led to his assassination in 96 CE. His death marked the end of the Flavian dynasty, as he was succeeded by Nerva, a more moderate emperor who would usher in the Five Good Emperors period, a time of relative peace and prosperity for the empire. The Flavian dynasty played a crucial role in the transition from the unstable years following the death of Nero to the more stable imperial system that would characterize the Roman Empire for centuries. Vespasian's reign restored order after the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, and his military and administrative reforms laid the foundation for the empire's growth. Titus's brief but notable reign was marked by his handling of disasters and his military triumphs, while Domitian's autocratic rule set the stage for the challenges of imperial succession and the eventual transition to a new dynasty. Following the assassination of Domitian in 96 CE, the Roman Empire entered a period of unparalleled stability and prosperity, commonly referred to as the Five Good Emperors. This term, coined by the historian Edward Gibbon, refers to the succession of emperors who ruled Rome from 96 CE to 188 CE: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. These emperors were not only capable administrators and military leaders, but they also maintained a strong commitment to Rome's traditional values while overseeing a period of expansion, peace, and intellectual flourishing. The era of the Five Good Emperors is often seen as the Golden Age of the Roman Empire. It was a time when the empire reached the height of its territorial expansion, its economy flourished, and the rule of law was consistently enforced. At the same time, the emperors of this period upheld a model of governance that balanced the needs of the Senate, the military, and the people. The Five Good Emperors were able to maintain the stability of the empire through their individual leadership qualities and their collective commitment to improving the Roman state. The Five Good Emperors began with Nerva, a senator who was selected by the Senate following the assassination of Domitian. Nerva's reign, which lasted from 96 to 98 CE, marked the transition from autocracy to a more balanced form of imperial rule. Nerva was not a military leader, but he understood the importance of securing the loyalty of the Roman legions. His selection as emperor was largely the result of a power struggle between the Senate and the military, and he sought to balance the interests of both groups. One of Nerva's most significant acts was his decision to adopt Trajan, a distinguished general, as his heir. This act of adoption was unprecedented and marked the beginning of a new system of succession, where emperors would choose their successors based on merit rather than bloodline. This practice would become a defining feature of the Five Good Emperors, ensuring that the leadership of Rome remained in capable hands. Nerva's adoption of Trajan, in particular, was a move that would have far-reaching consequences for the empire, as Trajan would go on to become one of Rome's greatest emperors. Despite his short reign, Nerva's efforts to stabilize the empire and restore order to Rome's political system laid the groundwork for his successors. His reign was characterized by reforms that focused on the welfare of the people, including the distribution of land to the poor and the granting of pensions to the elderly. Nerva's reforms, although limited in scope, demonstrated his commitment to the Roman ideals of justice and fairness. Trajan, who succeeded Nerva in 98 CE, is often considered one of the greatest emperors in Roman history. His reign, which lasted until his death in 117 CE, was marked by military conquests, territorial expansion, and a series of significant public works that transformed the empire. Trajan's leadership was characterized by his ability to balance military success with a commitment to improving Roman infrastructure, making his reign a period of exceptional growth. One of Trajan's most notable achievements was his military expansion, particularly in the east. In 105 CE, Trajan launched a successful campaign against the Dacians, a fierce tribe that lived in what is now modern-day Romania. After two major campaigns, Trajan defeated the Dacians and annexed their kingdom, bringing its wealth and resources into the empire. The conquest of Dacia was one of the most significant territorial expansions of the empire, as it provided Rome with valuable gold mines that would contribute to the empire's wealth for generations. In addition to his military conquests, Trajan was known for his public works projects, many of which remain iconic symbols of Roman engineering and architecture. Perhaps the most famous of these projects was the construction of Trajan's Forum in Rome, which included the magnificent Trajan's Column, a monument that commemorated his victory in Dacia. The column, adorned with intricate reliefs depicting scenes from the Dacian Wars, stands as a testament to the grandeur of Roman imperial architecture. Trajan also expanded the Roman road system and improved the empire's infrastructure, facilitating communication and trade across its vast territories. He was a patron of the arts, and his reign saw a flourishing of Roman sculpture, literature, and architecture. In his governance, Trajan was known for his respect for the Senate and his attempts to maintain a balance between imperial authority and republican traditions. Under Trajan, the Roman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent. The empire stretched from the British Isles to the sands of Arabia and from the Iberian Peninsula to the edges of Mesopotamia. Trajan's reign set the standard for imperial governance, combining military success with administrative efficiency. Hadrian, who succeeded Trajan in 117 CE, marked a shift in Roman policy, particularly in terms of imperial expansion. While Trajan had been a conqueror, Hadrian was a consolidator. Hadrian focused on securing and fortifying the empire's borders rather than expanding them. One of his most famous acts was the construction of Hadrian's Wall in Britain, a massive defensive fortification designed to protect Roman Britain from the northern tribes. Hadrian's Wall symbolized his policy of consolidating the empire's borders and securing the territories that Rome had already conquered. Hadrian was also known for his love of Greek culture and his interest in philosophy. He traveled extensively throughout the empire, visiting almost every province and personally overseeing military defenses, infrastructure projects, and public works. His travels helped him build rapport with the people of the empire, and his policies often reflected a deep understanding of the diverse cultures within Roman territory. Hadrian's interest in architecture led to the construction of many public buildings, including the famous Pantheon in Rome, which remains one of the best-preserved buildings from ancient Rome. Hadrian's reign was also marked by his efforts to centralize imperial power and maintain order within the provinces. He reorganized the military and strengthened the imperial bureaucracy, ensuring that the emperor had direct control over key military and administrative matters. Hadrian's reign, though focused on maintaining the status quo, saw significant achievements in architecture, governance, and imperial unity. Antoninus Pius, who succeeded Hadrian in 138 CE, ruled for an unprecedented period of 23 years, making his reign one of the longest in Roman history. Antoninus Pius was known for his commitment to peace, stability, and good governance. Unlike his predecessors, he faced few military crises and had little to do with large-scale conquests. Instead, his reign was characterized by administrative efficiency, legal reforms, and a focus on the welfare of the people. Antoninus Pius's reign was marked by his efforts to maintain internal stability and peace across the empire. His policies focused on maintaining the security of the empire's borders, particularly in Britain and the East, where he worked to strengthen Rome's relationships with neighboring tribes and kingdoms. He was also known for his efforts to reduce corruption within the imperial bureaucracy and to ensure that provincial governors upheld Roman law and justice. Antoninus Pius's reign was also a time of cultural flourishing. He continued the policies of Hadrian in promoting the arts, architecture, and philosophy. He was a patron of the intellectual and artistic communities, and his reign is often seen as one of relative peace and prosperity. Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors, ruled from 162 CE until his death in 188 CE. His reign is often remembered for his Stoic philosophy and his efforts to maintain the integrity of the empire during difficult times. Marcus Aurelius was a military leader, a philosopher, and a man of deep moral conviction. His reign was marked by continuous warfare on the empire's borders, particularly with the Germanic tribes along the Danube River. Despite the challenges posed by external threats, Marcus Aurelius is remembered for his commitment to justice and his attempts to govern in accordance with the ideals of Stoic philosophy. His personal writings, known as the Meditations, provide insight into his thoughts on duty, virtue, and leadership. Marcus Aurelius is often regarded as the last true philosopher-king in the history of the Roman Empire. Marcus Aurelius's reign was also marked by a series of military campaigns, particularly the Marcomannic Wars, which saw Rome engaged in prolonged battles with the Germanic tribes. These wars drained Roman resources and required Marcus to focus much of his attention on military matters. Despite these external challenges, Marcus Aurelius managed to keep the empire stable and secure, though his death marked the end of the era of the 5 good emperors. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE is one of the most significant events in world history. It marked the end of an era that had spanned nearly 5 centuries and witnessed the rise of one of the most powerful and influential empires the world had ever known. The decline of Rome was a gradual process, shaped by a variety of internal and external factors that culminated in the collapse of the western portion of the empire. While the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, would continue for nearly another 1,000 years, the fall of the Western Roman Empire marked a dramatic turning point, leading to the beginning of the Middle Ages. One of the key factors contributing to the fall of the Western Roman Empire was the growing political instability within the empire. From the reign of Marcus Aurelius, r. 168 to 188 CE onward, the Roman Empire struggled with a lack of strong leadership. After the era of the 5 good emperors, the empire was plagued by a series of weak and often incompetent rulers. Emperors were frequently overthrown or assassinated, and the imperial succession system, which had once been somewhat stable, became increasingly unpredictable. In the 3rd century CE, the Roman Empire experienced what is known as the crisis of the 3rd century. This period, from 200 to 250 years CE, saw the empire almost torn apart by internal conflict, economic instability, and external invasions. The empire was divided into multiple regions, with rival emperors fighting for control. This instability severely weakened the empire's ability to respond to external threats and left its borders vulnerable. Following the crisis, the empire attempted to stabilize under reforms introduced by emperors such as Diocletian, r. 284 to 305 CE, and Constantine the Great, ruling 308 to 337 CE. Diocletian divided the empire into the Eastern and Western Roman empires to make it more manageable, while Constantine sought to secure the empire through military and religious reforms. However, while these efforts temporarily helped to stabilize the empire, they also exposed deeper structural weaknesses. The Western Roman Empire, with its capital in Rome and later Ravenna, was increasingly overshadowed by the Eastern Roman Empire, with its more prosperous and strategically located capital, Constantinople. By the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire was plagued by economic decline. Heavy taxation, inflation, and the constant need to fund the military drained the imperial treasury. Additionally, the empire's reliance on mercenaries, who were often more loyal to their paymasters than to the Roman state, further undermined its stability. The rich provinces that had once supported the empire's economy were increasingly overburdened, and the empire struggled to maintain the infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, and urban centers that had once been the backbone of Roman power. While internal instability and economic troubles weakened the Western Roman Empire, external pressures were perhaps the most immediate cause of its decline. From the 3rd century CE onward, the empire faced increasing threats from various barbarian groups. The term barbarian referred to any non-Roman peoples, many of whom lived beyond the empire's borders. These groups, including the Visigoths, Vandals, Huns, and Franks, were increasingly able to challenge the empire's once unassailable military power. The first major blow to the Western Roman Empire came in 410 CE when the Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, sacked Rome. This event shocked the Roman world, as Rome had not been sacked in over 800 years. Though the empire had been in decline for some time, the sack of Rome symbolized the empire's loss of control over its own borders and its inability to defend its capital. The Visigoths, along with other barbarian groups, continued to press into Roman territory. The empire's military was stretched thin, unable to cope with the various incursions from all directions. The Huns, led by the fearsome Attila, posed a major threat to both the Western Roman Empire and its rival, the Eastern Roman Empire. Though Attila never captured Rome, his invasions destabilized much of the empire's northern and eastern borders. The fall of the Western Roman Empire accelerated in 476 CE when Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, deposed the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. This event marks the traditional end of the Western Roman Empire. Odoacer's rise to power represented the final blow to the centuries-old empire. The Western Roman Empire, once the dominant power in the Mediterranean world, was now effectively controlled by a barbarian leader. In contrast, the Eastern Roman Empire, now known as the Byzantine Empire, would continue for nearly 1,000 more years. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not mean the end of Roman civilization, but it did mark the beginning of a dramatic shift in European history. The collapse of central authority in the West led to the rise of various barbarian kingdoms, many of which would eventually become the foundations for modern European nations. The Visigoths established a kingdom in Spain, the Franks in Gaul, and the Ostrogoths in Italy. These kingdoms, while often adopting Roman customs and laws, also brought with them their own systems of governance, which were markedly different from the centralized structure of the Roman Empire. In the aftermath of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Europe entered what is traditionally referred to as the Dark Ages, a period that lasted for several centuries. This era was characterized by political fragmentation, economic decline, and a weakening of the intellectual and cultural achievements of the Roman world. However, this period was not devoid of progress. Christianity, which had become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire by the time of Constantine, played a major role in preserving many aspects of Roman culture and knowledge. The Catholic Church, in particular, became a stabilizing force in Europe. With the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the Church provided a sense of continuity and order. The papacy, with its vast network of churches, monasteries, and religious leaders, helped preserve Roman traditions, particularly through the establishment of monastic communities that copied ancient texts and preserved learning. In addition to the Church, the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of the Roman Empire, continued to preserve Roman governance, law, and culture. Though the Byzantine Empire was distinct from the Western Roman Empire, it saw itself as the continuation of Roman civilization. The Byzantine Empire would continue to influence the development of European and Mediterranean politics for centuries, preserving Roman law and traditions long after the fall of Rome in the West. Despite its fall, the legacy of the Roman Empire is immeasurable. Rome's contributions to law, architecture, engineering, military strategy, and governance left an enduring mark on the civilizations that followed. Roman law, particularly the Corpus Juris Civilis compiled under the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in the 6th century CE, became the foundation for much of modern Western legal systems. Roman architectural innovations, such as the use of arches, domes, and concrete, influenced the development of Western architecture for centuries. The Colosseum, aqueducts, Roman baths, and roads remain iconic symbols of Roman engineering. Furthermore, the Roman concept of citizenship, which extended certain legal rights to those living within the empire, laid the groundwork for modern ideas of political rights and the rule of law. The idea that a state could function based on laws that applied equally to all its citizens was revolutionary and has influenced countless nations throughout history. Roman culture, too, has left an indelible mark on the world. Latin, the language of Rome, remains the root of the Romance languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, and its influence is still felt in law, medicine, and the sciences. While the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE marked the end of a political entity that had lasted for centuries, its legacy would continue to shape the course of history. The Roman Empire's intellectual, legal, and cultural contributions remained integral to the development of Western civilization. As Europe entered the Middle Ages, it carried the echoes of Roman rule, and in many ways, the Renaissance would later be seen as a rebirth of Roman culture, art, and philosophy. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE is one of the defining moments in world history. The complex interplay of political, military, and economic factors that led to the collapse of this mighty empire has been the subject of much debate among historians. However, it is clear that the fall of Rome did not mark the end of Roman civilization. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the influence of the Roman Empire would continue to shape the world for centuries to come. The legacy of Rome, from its legal innovations to its cultural achievements, remains embedded in the foundations of the modern world.